You've been lied to about being chosen. They told you that if someone picked you, stayed with you, desired you, or made you feel special, then your heart would finally feel safe. But if that were true, why do so many people lose themselves inside relationships? Why do you keep saying yes when your soul is tired? Why do you keep shrinking your needs, silencing your truth, and pretending you are fine just so someone will not leave? The truth is, the need to be chosen is what keeps you abandoning yourself. Every time you chase approval more than peace, every time you betray your own feelings to keep someone close, and every time you make another person's attention the proof of your worth, you slowly walk away from yourself. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering begins when the mind clings to what it cannot control. And one of the deepest forms of clinging is the hunger to be wanted by someone who may never truly see you. This hunger makes you mistake anxiety for love, effort for connection, and self-sacrifice for loyalty, until one day you realize you have been chosen by others many times, but you have not chosen yourself. Tonight, as you listen to these lessons, something inside you will begin to return. Your heart will stop begging for a place where it does not feel safe. Your mind will become quieter. Your spirit will remember that your worth was never waiting inside another person's approval. And when you wake up tomorrow, you will begin to see the truth more clearly. Being chosen by someone else can feel beautiful, but choosing yourself is what finally sets you free. This is not just another audio to fall asleep to. This is the beginning of coming back to yourself. Are you ready? Let's begin. And maybe that is the deepest pain of all. Not that people rejected you, ignored you, or walked away, but that somewhere along the way, you started walking away from yourself first. Little by little, conversation by conversation, relationship by relationship, you learned to trade your truth for acceptance. You learned to hide parts of yourself just to feel wanted. And without even realizing it, the fear of being unwanted slowly became stronger than your connection to your own soul. There is a kind of sadness many people carry that almost nobody talks about. It is the sadness of constantly trying to be enough for everyone while secretly feeling like you are never enough for yourself. Some people spend their entire lives trying to become more lovable, more useful, more attractive, more agreeable, hoping that if they finally become good enough, nobody will abandon them. But the tragedy is that the more desperately someone needs acceptance, the more they often betray the very parts of themselves that needed love the most. Many people do not realize how early this pattern begins. A child notices very quickly what brings approval and what creates rejection. A child learns which emotions are safe to show and which emotions make people uncomfortable. Some children learn that being quiet keeps the peace. Others learn that being helpful earns affection. Others discover that achievement brings attention. Slowly, the child begins shaping themselves around what makes them accepted. At first, it feels harmless. It even feels necessary. But over time, this survival pattern can become an emotional prison. There are people who have spent so long adapting themselves for others that they no longer know who they truly are underneath all the performance. They know how to please. They know how to avoid conflict. They know how to become what others want, but they do not know what they actually feel, what they actually need, or what kind of life genuinely brings them peace. Their identity becomes built around emotional survival instead of authenticity. This is why some people feel exhausted after social interactions. They are not simply talking to others. They are constantly monitoring themselves. They are adjusting their personality, filtering their words, analyzing reactions, and trying to avoid disapproval at all costs. Their nervous system is always alert. Their mind becomes trapped in emotional hypervigilance. They are not relaxing into relationships. They are performing inside them. And the painful part is that many people mistake this performance for love. They believe love means sacrificing themselves endlessly. They believe love means always understanding others while ignoring their own emotional reality. They believe love means enduring disrespect without complaint. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something very different. It teaches that attachment rooted in fear will always create suffering. When the mind becomes attached to being accepted at any cost, it slowly disconnects from inner peace. A person who fears rejection deeply will often abandon their own needs before anyone else even asks them to. They say yes when they want to say no. They stay silent when something hurts them. They tolerate behavior that slowly destroys their spirit. They become emotionally available to everyone except themselves. And because this self-abandonment happens gradually, many people do not even notice it happening. There are people who apologize constantly, not because they are wrong, but because they are afraid of losing connection. There are people who over-explain themselves because they fear being misunderstood. There are people who tolerate emotional neglect because they secretly believe receiving crumbs of affection is better than being alone. Fear changes behavior in quiet ways. Sometimes the fear of being unwanted becomes so strong that people begin editing their entire personality. They hide opinions, they suppress emotions, they pretend to agree. They laugh when something hurts them. They make themselves smaller to avoid rejection. Eventually, they no longer know whether people love the real them or the version they created to survive emotionally. This creates a painful inner emptiness, because no matter how much validation they receive, it never fully satisfies them. Deep down, part of them knows the acceptance is conditional. It was earned through performance, not authenticity. And the soul becomes tired, carrying an identity built on fear. Buddhist teachings often speak about attachment as the root of suffering. Most people think attachment only means romantic obsession, but attachment can also mean attachment to approval, attachment to validation, attachment to being emotionally chosen. The moment your worth depends on another person's acceptance, your peace becomes unstable. Your emotions rise and fall based on how others respond to you. Their attention becomes your emotional oxygen. This is why rejection can feel unbearable for some people. It does not only trigger sadness, it triggers identity collapse. If someone's entire self-worth was built around being accepted, then rejection feels like proof that they are fundamentally unworthy. The pain becomes much deeper than the situation itself. But rejection is not always the true wound. Often, the deeper wound is the belief that being unwanted means being unlovable. And those are not the same thing. A flower rejected by winter is not worthless. It is simply in the wrong season. Many people spend years trying to force themselves into places where they are not emotionally safe. They beg for understanding from people committed to misunderstanding them. They chase affection from emotionally unavailable people. They continuously return to relationships that drain their spirit because some part of them believes emotional suffering is normal. And often, this pattern comes from childhood. Children who grow up emotionally neglected frequently become adults who overfunction in relationships. They become experts at sensing other people's moods. They become caretakers, fixers, peacemakers, performers. They learn that love must be earned through usefulness. So later in life, they continue sacrificing themselves because it feels familiar. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar peace. That is one of the saddest psychological truths many people never realize. Some people stay in unhealthy relationships, not because they are happy, but because suffering feels emotionally familiar. Chaos feels familiar. Anxiety feels familiar. Walking on eggshells feels familiar. Their nervous system learned early that love and instability often arrive together. So when calm love finally appears, they may not trust it. Peace can feel boring to a nervous system addicted to emotional survival. This is why healing is not simply about finding better people. Healing is about rebuilding your relationship with yourself. Because if you do not value your own needs, boundaries, emotions, and truth, you will unconsciously continue choosing situations that reinforce self-abandonment. The Buddhist path teaches awareness before transformation. You cannot heal patterns you refuse to see. Many people spend years blaming others without recognizing how often they abandon themselves first. This is not about self-blame, it is about self-awareness. There is immense power in finally asking yourself difficult questions. Why am I afraid to disappoint people? Why do I feel guilty for having needs? Why do I tolerate behavior that hurts me? Why do I feel responsible for other people's emotions? Why does rejection feel like proof that something is wrong with me? These questions begin opening the door back to yourself. And one of the most important realizations during healing is understanding that your needs are not selfish. Many people were conditioned to believe caring for themselves is wrong. They were praised for self-sacrifice, but shamed for self-protection. So they grew up believing exhaustion is kindness and emotional neglect is maturity. But constantly abandoning yourself does not create love. It creates resentment, burnout, confusion, anxiety, and emotional emptiness. Real love cannot grow where authenticity is constantly suffocating. The truth is, people who genuinely love you do not require you to betray yourself to keep them comfortable. They do not punish you for having boundaries. They do not force you to abandon your truth just to maintain connection. And this realization can feel terrifying because it means many relationships survive only because one person keeps sacrificing themselves to maintain peace. Some people are loved only for how much they tolerate. That realization changes everything. Because eventually, a moment comes when the soul becomes too exhausted to continue performing. The people-pleasing no longer works. The endless self-sacrifice no longer feels noble. The emotional hunger becomes unbearable, and the person finally realizes they have spent years trying to become acceptable to others while feeling increasingly disconnected from themselves. This is where true healing begins, not when everyone finally approves of you, not when someone finally chooses you, not when the world finally validates your worth. Healing begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. It begins when you stop apologizing for your emotions. It begins when you stop shrinking your truth to fit inside someone else's expectations. It begins when you understand that your value does not increase when people desire you, and it does not decrease when people reject you. A mountain remains a mountain even when nobody is looking at it. And slowly, something beautiful starts happening inside you. You stop chasing people who cannot meet you emotionally. You stop forcing connection where there is no peace. You stop seeing rejection as proof of unworthiness. Instead, you begin seeing it as redirection. You begin understanding that being unwanted by the wrong people can protect your spirit. And perhaps for the first time in your life, you start listening to yourself. Your real feelings, your real exhaustion, your real needs, your real intuition. You stop treating your emotions like enemies and begin treating them like messengers, because your soul has been speaking to you for a very long time. The anxiety was speaking, the exhaustion was speaking, the resentment was speaking, the loneliness inside relationships was speaking, but fear kept drowning everything out. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough. Yet Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace never comes from controlling how others see us. Peace comes from releasing attachment to external validation entirely. The moment you stop needing everyone to choose you, something extraordinary happens. You finally gain the freedom to choose yourself. And choosing yourself does not mean becoming selfish or cold. It means becoming emotionally honest. It means no longer sacrificing your inner peace for temporary acceptance. It means understanding that your worth exists before approval, before relationships, before praise, and before validation. For many people, this realization feels unfamiliar at first. They spent so many years measuring their value through other people's reactions that they forgot how to simply exist without constantly proving themselves. But healing slowly reconnects you to something deeper than approval. It reconnects you to your own presence. You begin enjoying solitude without feeling worthless. You begin setting boundaries without overwhelming guilt. You begin allowing people to misunderstand you without desperately chasing correction. You begin realizing that protecting your peace is not cruelty, it is self-respect. And perhaps the most freeing truth of all is this: the people who truly belong in your life will not require you to disappear in order to keep them close. Real connection does not demand self-betrayal. Real love does not require emotional starvation. Real peace does not force you to abandon yourself just to feel chosen. The more connected you become to your authentic self, the less desperate you become for external validation. And ironically, this is often when relationships become healthier, because now connection is no longer built on fear. It is built on honesty, mutual respect, emotional safety, and inner stability. You no longer love from desperation. You love from wholeness, and that changes everything. And this is where many people begin to notice something uncomfortable. Even after they stop abandoning themselves in obvious ways, there is still a deep emotional hunger living underneath everything. A hunger to be noticed, to be praised, to feel important to someone, to feel emotionally chosen. Because for many people, self-worth was never built internally. It was built through reactions, attention, validation, and approval from others. And without realizing it, they became emotionally dependent on being desired in order to feel alive. There is a kind of emptiness that no achievement, relationship, compliment, or attention can permanently fill. Some people spend years trying to escape this emptiness without understanding where it comes from. They chase affection, recognition, praise, popularity, romance, success, or admiration, hoping that one more moment of validation will finally make them feel complete. But the relief never lasts very long. The emotional high fades quickly, and the emptiness quietly returns. This is the hidden addiction to emotional validation. Most people do not recognize it as an addiction because it looks normal on the surface. It looks like caring what others think. It looks like wanting love. It looks like trying to be accepted. But underneath these behaviors is often something much deeper. A person slowly becomes emotionally dependent on external reactions to regulate their internal sense of worth. Some people cannot feel valuable unless someone praises them. Others feel invisible unless they are being desired romantically. Some feel anxious when nobody texts them back quickly. Others constantly seek reassurance in relationships because silence makes them feel emotionally unsafe. And many people become trapped in endless comparison because their self-esteem rises and falls based on how others respond to them. The painful part is that emotional validation works temporarily. That is what makes it addictive. A compliment creates relief. Attention creates relief. Being wanted creates relief. Being chosen creates relief, but only for a moment. Then the mind starts craving it again. This cycle quietly controls millions of people without them realizing it. They believe they are searching for love, but often they are searching for emotional confirmation that they matter. And because external validation is unstable, their emotional state becomes unstable too. One small rejection can ruin their entire day. One ignored message can trigger anxiety. One criticism can feel devastating. One emotional withdrawal can create panic. Because when self-worth depends on external responses, life becomes emotionally exhausting. Buddhist teachings speak deeply about craving and attachment. Craving is not only about material things. Human beings can become addicted to emotional experiences just as intensely. The mind starts chasing feelings that temporarily soothe inner emptiness, and validation becomes one of the strongest emotional drugs because it briefly silences insecurity, but only briefly. That is why some people constantly need reassurance, even inside loving relationships. No matter how much love they receive, it never fully settles inside them. Their partner can say, "I love you," 100 times, but fear still returns, doubt still returns, anxiety still returns, because the real wound is not the absence of love from others. The real wound is disconnection from themselves. When a person does not internally feel worthy, they will constantly search for external proof that they are enough. This creates exhausting relationship patterns. Some people become addicted to romantic attention, not because they truly love the person, but because being desired temporarily boosts their self-esteem. Others stay trapped in toxic cycles because emotional inconsistency creates stronger psychological dependency. Intermittent affection can become emotionally intoxicating. The human nervous system becomes confused when love and anxiety are constantly mixed together. Sometimes people mistake emotional intensity for emotional depth. They think obsession is love. They think craving is connection. They think anxiety means passion. But often what they are experiencing is emotional dependency fueled by insecurity. A person addicted to validation may struggle deeply with being alone. Silence becomes uncomfortable because there are no external distractions feeding their identity. Without messages, praise, attention, or interaction, they suddenly feel empty. This is why many people constantly stay busy socially, emotionally, or digitally. They are not simply avoiding boredom, they are avoiding the painful feeling of confronting themselves without external stimulation. Some people scroll endlessly through social media, not because they enjoy it, but because they are unconsciously seeking emotional confirmation. Likes, comments, attention, and reactions become tiny emotional rewards, and each reward briefly gives the brain a sense of significance. But afterward, the emptiness quietly returns again. This is one reason modern life has intensified emotional insecurity. People now receive constant opportunities to compare themselves to others. They compare beauty, success, relationships, popularity, lifestyles, and attention. And slowly, self-worth becomes more externally dependent than ever before. A person may begin measuring their value through visibility instead of authenticity, through attention instead of inner peace, through desirability instead of emotional wholeness. But no amount of external admiration can permanently heal internal disconnection. That is why even highly admired people can still feel deeply insecure. Some of the most externally successful people secretly feel emotionally empty because validation was never the true solution. It was only temporary emotional anesthesia. The Buddha taught that attachment creates suffering because anything external is unstable by nature. Attention changes, relationships change, people's opinions change, attraction changes, social status changes. If your emotional security depends on unstable things, your mind will constantly live in fear. Fear of losing attention, fear of rejection, fear of being replaced, fear of becoming unimportant. This fear quietly controls many people's lives. Some people become perfectionists because they learned that achievement brings approval. They feel valuable only when succeeding. Rest becomes guilt. Mistakes become shame. Failure becomes identity collapse. They are not pursuing excellence from joy. They are pursuing validation from fear. Others become emotionally overgiving. They constantly help, rescue, support, and sacrifice themselves because usefulness became their survival strategy. Deep down, they fear that without giving constantly, nobody would truly choose them. Some people become addicted to attractiveness. They obsess over appearance because beauty became linked to worthiness. Aging terrifies them because they fear becoming emotionally invisible. Every wrinkle feels like lost value. Every rejection feels personal. Others become addicted to being needed emotionally. They unconsciously choose broken or emotionally unavailable people because rescuing others temporarily gives them identity and purpose. They confuse emotional exhaustion with meaning. Validation addiction can take many forms, but underneath them all is usually the same painful belief. Without external confirmation, I am not enough. This belief often forms very early in life. Children naturally look to caregivers for emotional reflection. Healthy caregivers help children feel seen, valued, safe, and emotionally accepted. But when love becomes conditional, children begin associating worth with performance. They learn that approval must be earned. Some children receive praise only when achieving. Others receive attention only when behaving perfectly. Some are emotionally ignored unless they are useful. Others feel loved only when suppressing their own emotions. And slowly, the child begins disconnecting from their authentic self in order to maintain emotional connection. The nervous system learns an unconscious equation. If I am wanted, I am safe. If I am rejected, I am worthless. This programming can continue far into adulthood. That is why some adults become deeply emotionally reactive to even small forms of rejection. A delayed response, emotional distance, criticism, or lack of praise can trigger overwhelming insecurity because the nervous system interprets it as emotional danger. The reaction may seem irrational on the surface, but underneath it is often years of accumulated emotional conditioning. And many people carry shame about this dependency. They tell themselves they are too sensitive or too needy. But often, what they truly need is not more validation. What they truly need is healing, because emotional validation itself is not bad. Human beings naturally need connection, encouragement, affection, and emotional support. The problem begins when validation becomes the primary source of identity. When you cannot emotionally regulate yourself without external reassurance, your inner peace becomes controlled by other people. That is emotional imprisonment. The Buddhist path does not teach emotional numbness or isolation. It teaches non-attachment. There is a difference. Non-attachment means enjoying love without making it the source of your existence. It means appreciating connection without emotionally collapsing when external approval disappears. A flower can enjoy sunlight without becoming psychologically dependent on applause for blooming. Many people never learned how to emotionally sit with themselves without distraction. They never learned how to comfort themselves internally. They never learned how to validate their own emotions. So they constantly seek outside sources to stabilize inner emptiness. But external validation is unstable by nature because other people are unstable by nature. Human beings are imperfect. Sometimes they misunderstand you. Sometimes they disappoint you. Sometimes they leave. Sometimes they become emotionally unavailable. If your identity is built entirely around external responses, your emotional state will constantly feel unsafe. This creates chronic anxiety. You start overthinking interactions, analyzing tones, checking messages repeatedly, seeking reassurance, fearing abandonment, feeling emotionally drained by uncertainty. And eventually, your life becomes consumed by emotional monitoring instead of inner living. One of the saddest effects of validation addiction is that people stop making decisions based on truth and start making decisions based on approval. They choose careers that impress others instead of fulfilling them. They stay inside relationships that suffocate them because loneliness feels unbearable. They hide their authentic personality to avoid judgment. They silence their intuition to maintain acceptance, and slowly they lose connection with their inner voice completely. This inner disconnection often creates depression, because the soul cannot thrive when authenticity is constantly suppressed. There are people who appear socially successful, yet secretly feel emotionally numb because their entire identity became performance-based. They became experts at being liked, but strangers to themselves. And this is why no amount of praise ever feels enough, because praise cannot replace self-connection, attention cannot replace self-worth, desire cannot replace inner peace. Validation addiction also creates emotional exhaustion because constantly seeking approval requires endless psychological energy. You become hyper-aware of how others perceive you. You constantly adjust yourself socially. You fear criticism intensely. You struggle to relax authentically around people. Even positive attention becomes stressful because now you fear losing it. The mind becomes trapped in emotional survival mode. But healing begins when a person finally realizes something important. The emotional emptiness was never caused by a lack of validation. It was caused by abandonment of the self. This realization changes everything, because now the focus shifts inward. Instead of asking, "How do I make people value me?" you begin asking, "Why do I not emotionally value myself?" Instead of desperately trying to become desirable, you begin rebuilding inner safety. You begin listening to your own emotions without judgment. You begin validating your own experiences. You begin learning how to sit with loneliness without treating it like proof of worthlessness. You begin discovering who you are outside of performance. And this process feels uncomfortable at first because many people are unfamiliar with internal emotional grounding. They spent years depending on external responses for emotional stability. Learning to create inner stability takes patience. At first, silence may feel unbearable. Solitude may feel empty. The absence of constant attention may trigger anxiety. But slowly, something beautiful begins happening. You stop panicking every time someone pulls away emotionally. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop treating rejection like identity destruction. You stop measuring your worth through visibility. You stop chasing people who only feed your insecurity. Because for the first time, your sense of self is no longer entirely outsourced to others, and this creates an entirely different kind of peace, a quieter peace, a deeper peace, a peace that does not disappear every time someone loses interest in you. Buddhist wisdom teaches that freedom begins when attachment loosens. The moment you stop clinging desperately to external validation, the nervous system slowly begins calming down. Life becomes less emotionally chaotic because your identity is no longer constantly dependent on unstable things. You still appreciate love. You still enjoy connection. You still value kindness. But your entire emotional existence no longer collapses without constant confirmation from others. This is emotional maturity, not becoming cold, not becoming detached from humanity, but becoming internally rooted enough that your worth survives both praise and rejection. And perhaps one of the greatest signs of healing is this. You begin wanting relationships less from desperation and more from genuine connection. You no longer need people to complete you emotionally. You no longer beg to feel valuable. You no longer chase attention to escape yourself. Instead, relationships become something beautiful shared between two whole people instead of two wounded people trying to emotionally rescue themselves through each other. And that changes the entire quality of love, because now love is no longer driven by fear. It is driven by presence, by honesty, by emotional safety, by peace. And perhaps for the first time in your life, you begin understanding something your soul has been trying to teach you all along. Your worth does not increase when people praise you, and it does not disappear when people stop choosing you. Your value existed long before anyone validated it, and it will continue existing even in silence. And this is where the wound becomes even more dangerous. When a person depends on praise, attention, and being chosen to feel valuable, they do not only lose peace, they slowly lose trust in themselves. Their own inner voice becomes quieter than the desire to be accepted. Their intuition may whisper, "This does not feel right," but the hunger for love answers louder, "But what if this is the only chance I have?" There is a painful kind of confusion that happens when the heart wants love more than it wants truth. You can feel something is wrong, but still explain it away. You can sense that someone is not treating you with care, but still blame yourself for being too sensitive. You can notice the coldness, the inconsistency, the disrespect, the emotional distance, but instead of trusting what your spirit already knows, you begin negotiating with reality. This is how people lose themselves without realizing it. Not always through one big decision, but through small moments of self-doubt. One ignored feeling, one swallowed concern, one excuse made for someone's behavior, one quiet betrayal of your own knowing. And over time, the voice inside you that once protected you becomes tired of being dismissed. Many people think intuition is mysterious, but sometimes it is very simple. It is the quiet discomfort in your body when someone's words do not match their actions. It is the heaviness you feel after talking to a person who claims to love you but leaves you emotionally drained. It is the strange uneasiness that appears when you are trying to force yourself to feel safe in a place where your nervous system does not feel safe. But when someone craves love deeply, they often treat intuition like an enemy. They do not want the truth to interrupt the fantasy. They do not want their inner wisdom to tell them that the person they are attached to may not be good for them. They do not want to hear the quiet voice saying, "You are abandoning yourself again." So they silence it. They call it fear. They call it insecurity. They call it overthinking. Sometimes it may be those things, yes, but sometimes it is wisdom trying to protect what is left of your peace. This is why attachment to approval creates lifelong emotional confusion. When your deepest need is to be accepted, you begin choosing what feels familiar over what feels healthy. You begin asking, "How do I make them stay?" instead of asking, "Do I feel safe here?" You ask, "What can I change about myself so they love me?" instead of asking, "Why must I shrink to be loved by this person?" You ask, "What if I lose them?" instead of asking, "What have I already lost inside myself by holding on?" Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows when the mind clings to what it fears losing. And when someone clings to approval, their perception becomes clouded. They no longer see clearly. They see through fear. They hear through longing. They interpret every small sign of affection as proof of hope, and every sign of distance as proof that they must try harder. The mind becomes restless because it is no longer rooted in truth. It is rooted in craving. Craving does not ask, "Is this good for me?" Craving asks, "Can this make the emptiness stop?" That is the trap. A person who is emotionally hungry may accept crumbs and call it a feast. They may receive one kind message after days of confusion and feel relieved enough to forget the pain that came before it. They may hold on to someone's potential instead of their pattern. They may say, "But they can be so sweet sometimes," while ignoring how often they feel anxious, unseen, and emotionally unsafe. This does not mean they are foolish. It means the longing to be loved has become stronger than the ability to protect themselves. Many people who ignore their intuition are not weak. They are wounded. Somewhere inside them, they learned that love must be earned, chased, waited for, or proven. So when love feels uncertain, they do not always walk away. They work harder. They become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, more available, more silent, more careful. They confuse endurance with devotion. But there is a difference between patience and self-abandonment. Patience allows love to grow. Self-abandonment allows pain to continue. Patience comes from peace. Self-abandonment comes from fear, and fear can disguise itself as loyalty. Someone may say, "I am just giving them time," when the truth is, they are afraid to face what their intuition already knows. Someone may say, "They are just going through a lot," when the truth is, they are excusing repeated behavior that continues to hurt them. Someone may say, "Maybe I am expecting too much," when the truth is, they have been asking for the bare minimum from someone who keeps making love feel like a negotiation. The more a person ignores their intuition, the more confused they become. Their inner world becomes full of contradictions. They feel hurt but defend the person who hurt them. They feel lonely but insist they are loved. They feel anxious but call it passion. They feel tired but call it commitment. They feel unseen but keep trying to become easier to love. This confusion is not random. It is what happens when truth and attachment fight inside the same heart. Your intuition wants freedom. Your attachment wants closeness. Your intuition wants honesty. Your attachment wants hope. Your intuition looks at patterns. Your attachment clings to promises. Your intuition listens to how your body feels. Your attachment listens to what you wish could happen. And this is why many people stay stuck for years. They are not lacking signs. They are ignoring them because accepting the truth would force them to grieve the fantasy. And sometimes people would rather suffer inside hope than heal inside truth. But hope without reality can become another form of suffering. Buddhist teachings remind us that clear seeing is the beginning of freedom. To see clearly means to stop decorating pain with excuses. It means to stop turning inconsistency into mystery. It means to stop calling emotional unavailability a challenge you must conquer. It means looking at a situation exactly as it is, not as your loneliness wishes it could be. This kind of honesty can hurt at first, but it is a clean pain. It is the pain of waking up, not the pain of staying asleep inside illusion. When you crave love, you may become extremely skilled at explaining away discomfort. You may tell yourself, "Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I should be more patient. Maybe if I become calmer, prettier, more successful, more useful, more spiritual, more forgiving, they will finally treat me better." But notice what happens in that kind of thinking. The problem always becomes you. The solution always becomes you changing. The other person's behavior stays untouched, while your identity gets rearranged around their inability to love you properly. That is not growth. That is emotional self-erasure. Real growth makes you more yourself. Fear-based approval-seeking makes you less yourself. Your intuition often speaks through discomfort before your mind has words. It may show up as tightness in the chest, a heavy stomach, tiredness after certain conversations, sudden sadness after being around someone, or a deep inner resistance you cannot explain. Many people dismiss these signals because they were taught to trust logic more than their body. But the body often notices emotional truth before the mind is ready to admit it. The body remembers tone. It remembers inconsistency. It remembers tension. It remembers when you are not safe to be honest. It remembers when love feels conditional. It remembers when you are performing instead of relaxing. So when your body keeps becoming uneasy around someone, do not rush to silence it. Ask what it is trying to show you. Sometimes your intuition is not telling you to run away from every difficult relationship. Sometimes it is simply asking you to slow down and observe, to stop forcing certainty, to stop rushing attachment, to stop making permanent emotional decisions based on temporary affection, to watch actions, not just words. Because people reveal themselves through patterns. A person can say beautiful things and still create confusion. A person can apologize and still keep repeating the same wound. A person can desire you and still not respect you. A person can need you and still not love you in a healthy way. This is why intuition must be trained to listen to consistency, not intensity. Many people who crave love are attracted to intensity because intensity feels like proof. Strong chemistry, sudden attention, deep conversations, dramatic apologies, emotional highs and lows, all of it can feel meaningful, but intensity is not the same. As safety. A fire can feel warm, but it can also burn down the house. Healthy love may not always feel like a storm. Sometimes it feels calm, steady, respectful, simple, and safe. But if someone grew up associating love with anxiety, calmness may feel unfamiliar. They may mistake peace for boredom and confusion for passion. So they ignore the people who feel safe and chase the people who activate old wounds. This is how attachment wounds distort intuition. The nervous system does not always chase what is good. Sometimes it chases what is familiar. If inconsistency was familiar, inconsistent people may feel strangely magnetic. If emotional distance was familiar, unavailable people may feel exciting. If love had to be earned, difficult people may feel like a mission, and the person may tell themselves, "I just feel such a strong connection," when in truth, the connection may be an old wound recognizing a familiar pattern. This is why Buddhist mindfulness is so powerful. Mindfulness teaches you to observe your craving without obeying it immediately. It creates a small space between the feeling and the action. Instead of running towards someone because you feel desperate, you pause. Instead of sending the message because anxiety is screaming, you breathe. Instead of accepting poor treatment because you fear abandonment, you look deeply and ask, "What is this attachment asking me to sacrifice?" That question can save years of pain. What is this attachment asking you to sacrifice? Your peace, your dignity, your sleep, your confidence, your friendships, your purpose, your emotional health, your self-respect. If love requires you to abandon your inner wisdom, it is not leading you home, it is leading you away from yourself. There is a quiet tragedy in watching someone doubt their own reality because they want to be loved. They know they are hurt, but they ask if they are being dramatic. They know they are tired, but they ask if they should try harder. They know something is missing, but they ask if they should be grateful for what little they receive. This is what happens when approval becomes more important than inner truth. And the healing begins when you stop treating your intuition like an inconvenience. You begin by listening to small truths, not dramatic truths, not life-changing declarations, just small, honest moments. I did not like how that felt. I feel drained after this conversation. I am afraid to speak honestly with this person. I am constantly waiting for them to become kind again. I feel more anxious than peaceful here. These small truths matter. They are breadcrumbs back to yourself. The more you listen to them, the stronger your inner voice becomes. At first, it may feel strange because you may be used to asking everyone else what you should feel. But over time, you begin realizing that your body, your heart, and your awareness have been collecting information all along. You do not need to become suspicious of everyone. That is not wisdom. Wisdom is not paranoia. Wisdom is clear seeing. It is the ability to notice what is happening without letting loneliness rewrite the evidence. When someone values you, you do not have to constantly convince yourself that they do. Their actions carry peace. Their presence does not make you feel like you are auditioning for love. Their affection does not leave you confused for days. Their care does not require you to become smaller. And when someone repeatedly makes you feel unseen, your intuition will keep knocking until you listen. The problem is that many people fear what listening will require. Listening may require boundaries. It may require a difficult conversation. It may require walking away. It may require grieving someone you still love. It may require admitting that the connection you wanted is not the connection that exists. But the pain of listening is temporary. The pain of ignoring yourself can last for years. Every time you silence your intuition to keep someone, you lose a little trust in yourself. And when you lose trust in yourself, life becomes deeply confusing. You start needing others to define reality for you. You ask friends what every message means. You search for signs. You overanalyze. You become dependent on outside interpretation because you no longer believe your own inner knowing. This is why rebuilding self-trust is one of the most important parts of healing. Self-trust grows when your actions begin matching your inner truth. When something feels wrong and you pause instead of rushing. When you need rest and you honor it. When you feel hurt and you admit it. When you say no without explaining for an hour. When you stop begging your mind to accept what your soul has already rejected. And slowly you begin feeling whole again. Not because everyone approves of you, but because you approve of your own honesty. This is the Buddhist movement from craving to awareness. Craving says, I need this person to choose me so I can feel okay. Awareness says, I notice I want to be chosen, but I will not abandon truth to get it. Craving says, I cannot lose them. Awareness says, I cannot lose myself again. That shift is freedom. It does not happen in one night. It happens in small acts of inner loyalty. You stop laughing when something hurts. You stop saying, it is fine, when it is not fine. You stop pretending confusion is peace. You stop chasing answers from people whose behavior is already the answer. And then your life becomes quieter. Not empty, but clearer. You begin seeing that intuition was never trying to punish you. It was trying to protect your path. It was trying to guide you away from relationships where you had to become less alive in order to be accepted. It was trying to remind you that being loved should not require constant self-denial. The more you trust your inner wisdom, the less power approval has over you. You can still desire love, but you no longer worship it. You can still enjoy affection, but you no longer sacrifice your truth for it. You can still care about people, but you no longer hand them the authority to define your reality. And this is where self-worth becomes real. Not when everyone praises you, not when someone finally chooses you, not when a relationship makes you feel important. Self-worth becomes real when you can stand inside your own truth, even when that truth risks disappointing someone else. Because the person you must not keep betraying is yourself. And once you understand that, you stop asking love to rescue you from your intuition. You let your intuition guide you toward the kind of love that does not require rescue at all. And slowly, this becomes one of the hardest truths to accept. Some people will never fully see your worth, no matter how deeply you love them. No matter how patient you are, no matter how much you sacrifice, no matter how carefully you explain your heart, and the more desperately you chase recognition from people who cannot truly value you, the more suffering quietly enters your life. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that happens when you keep trying to prove your value to someone who has already decided not to see it. It is exhausting because part of you keeps believing that if you could just say the right thing, love them the right way, become more understanding, more attractive, more successful, more emotionally available, then finally they would recognize what you mean to them. But some people are not blind to your worth because you are lacking. They are blind because they do not have the emotional depth, awareness, or capacity to truly see you. And this is where suffering deepens, not only because you feel unseen, but because you start questioning yourself in the process. You begin wondering whether your needs are too much, whether your feelings are inconvenient, whether your love is difficult to accept, whether your existence itself is somehow not enough. This is the danger of tying your self-worth to another person's recognition. Their inability to value you slowly becomes your personal definition of yourself. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment creates suffering because the mind begins clinging to outcomes it cannot control. One of the most painful forms of attachment is becoming emotionally attached to someone finally validating your worth. You wait for their affection to heal your insecurity. You wait for their consistency to calm your anxiety. You wait for their recognition to finally make you feel important. But the problem is this: when your worth depends on another person's awareness, your peace becomes fragile. If they praise you, you feel valuable. If they pull away, you feel worthless. If they choose you, you feel safe. If they ignore you, you feel invisible. Your emotional state begins living in their hands instead of your own. This creates a life full of instability because human beings are unpredictable. People change. People become distant. People misunderstand. People project their wounds onto others. People fail to appreciate things they are not emotionally mature enough to recognize. If your identity depends entirely on how others perceive you, you will constantly feel emotionally unsafe. Many people spend years chasing emotionally unavailable people because unavailable people activate old wounds. The lack of consistency creates obsession. The uncertainty creates emotional addiction. The person keeps hoping that one day they will finally receive the love, recognition, or commitment they have been starving for. And because the emotional reward is inconsistent, the attachment often grows stronger. This is why people can become obsessed with relationships that bring them very little actual peace. The mind becomes attached to the possibility of finally being chosen. And often, the deeper desire is not even love itself. It is emotional redemption. The person unconsciously thinks, if someone who once overlooked me finally chooses me, then maybe I am worthy after all. But no human being can permanently heal insecurity through recognition alone. A person who cannot see your worth usually reveals it through patterns long before words confirm it. You feel unseen around them. You feel emotionally uncertain around them. You feel like you are constantly trying to earn basic care. Their attention feels inconsistent. Their affection feels conditional. Their effort disappears unless it benefits them emotionally. Yet because the craving for recognition is so strong, many people continue ignoring these signs. They tell themselves stories to survive emotionally. They are just afraid. They are going through a hard time. They do care deep down. They just struggle with emotions. And sometimes these things are true. But even if they are true, they do not erase the pain caused by remaining in a connection where your spirit continuously feels unseen. Compassion should never require self-destruction. One of the hardest lessons in life is accepting that some people benefit from your love without ever truly valuing your humanity. They enjoy your attention, your support, your patience, your emotional availability, but they do not truly honor your heart. And because you desperately want to be recognized, you keep giving more, hoping that eventually your loyalty will awaken something inside them. But love cannot force emotional maturity into another person. You cannot convince someone to value what they are emotionally unwilling to understand. This is why Buddhism places such importance on non-attachment. Non-attachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop attaching your identity to outcomes you cannot control. You stop making your worth dependent on whether someone else finally appreciates you. You stop begging emotionally blind people to describe your beauty. A flower does not lose its value because someone walks past it without noticing it. Yet many people spend years emotionally collapsing because one person could not recognize what they carried inside. The tragedy is not only being unseen by others. The tragedy is beginning to see yourself through their limited perception. When someone repeatedly fails to value you, you may slowly start shrinking yourself emotionally. You speak less, need less, feel guilty for wanting basic kindness. You become afraid to express hurt because you worry it will push them further away. You settle for emotional crumbs because some part of you believes asking for more risks abandonment. This creates profound loneliness. Not loneliness from being alone, but loneliness from constantly betraying your own emotional truth to maintain connection. There are relationships where people feel emotionally starving while sitting beside someone they deeply love. They keep waiting for warmth that rarely arrives. They keep hoping for emotional safety that never stabilizes. They keep convincing themselves to stay patient while their inner world quietly deteriorates. And often, they stay because walking away would force them to confront something terrifying. The possibility that the person they desperately wanted validation from may never become who they hoped. Grieving reality is painful, but staying trapped inside illusion is often more painful in the long run. Many people do not realize how much emotional energy they spend trying to make emotionally unavailable people understand them. They explain themselves repeatedly. They try to prove their intentions. They attempt to communicate more clearly, love more deeply, forgive more generously. But some people are committed to misunderstanding you because truly seeing you would require emotional accountability they are unwilling to face. And this is why chasing recognition becomes spiritually exhausting. You start abandoning your own life while trying to enter someone else's emotional world. You lose sleep over their responses. You lose confidence over their distance. You lose clarity over their inconsistency. You lose yourself trying to become visible to someone who keeps emotionally looking away. The Buddha taught that suffering often comes from resistance to reality. We suffer because we keep demanding life become different from what it currently is. We suffer because we refuse to release what our spirit already knows is harming us. And nowhere is this more visible than in relationships where people keep chasing unavailable love. Sometimes reality is simple, even when it hurts. Someone who values you consistently makes room for you emotionally. Someone who respects you does not repeatedly make you question your importance. Someone who truly sees your worth does not force you to beg for emotional certainty. This does not mean healthy relationships are perfect. Human beings are imperfect. There will always be misunderstandings, fears, and difficult moments. But there is a difference between human imperfection and emotional starvation. A healthy connection may face struggles, but it still carries emotional sincerity, mutual care, and respect. An unhealthy connection often leaves one person constantly chasing while the other remains emotionally distant. And chasing slowly destroys dignity. Not because wanting love is shameful, but because desperation makes people tolerate what their soul would normally reject. Some people become addicted to the chase itself. They confuse emotional pursuit with meaning. The harder someone is to reach emotionally, the more valuable their approval begins to feel. But this often has little to do with genuine love. It has more to do with unresolved emotional wounds. A person who truly knows their worth does not need to chase basic care. This realization changes the entire way you experience relationships. You stop trying to convince people to value you. You stop over-explaining your heart. You stop exhausting yourself trying to prove your goodness. You stop shrinking yourself to fit inside conditional affection. Because eventually you understand something powerful. People can only meet you as deeply as they have met themselves. Someone disconnected from their own emotions may never fully understand yours. Someone uncomfortable with vulnerability may never know how to hold your softness safely. Someone who measures relationships through convenience may never understand the depth of your loyalty. And none of these things define your value. But wounded people often internalize other people's limitations as personal failures. If someone cannot love them deeply, they assume they are difficult to love. If someone cannot commit, they assume they are not enough. If someone cannot appreciate them, they assume they are unworthy. This is how emotional suffering becomes identity. Buddhist awareness interrupts this illusion. It teaches you to separate your essence from other people's projections. Just because someone fails to recognize your value does not mean your value disappeared. It simply means their vision is limited. Not everyone has the emotional capacity to recognize depth. Not everyone has healed enough to receive healthy love. Not everyone knows how to honor tenderness. And some people only realize the value of what they lost after it is gone. But your healing cannot depend on whether they eventually understand. That is another trap. Many people secretly wait for emotional vindication. They fantasize that one day the person who overlooked them will finally regret it, apologize, or recognize everything they failed to appreciate. And while this fantasy is understandable, remaining emotionally attached to it keeps the wound alive. True freedom begins when you no longer need the people who hurt you to finally validate your worth. Because if your peace still depends on their recognition, you are still emotionally tied to them. Healing means releasing the need for emotional permission to value yourself. It means understanding that your worth existed before their approval and survives after their rejection. This is difficult because human beings naturally long to be seen. There is nothing weak about wanting connection. The pain begins when that longing becomes dependency. When another person's inability to recognize your beauty becomes the foundation of your self-image. Some people remain emotionally trapped for years because they keep searching for closure from people incapable of giving it. They wait for understanding from people who avoid emotional honesty. They wait for accountability from people who refuse self-reflection. They wait for reciprocity from people who only know how to receive. And slowly, their life becomes centered around emotional waiting. Waiting for clarity, waiting for change, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting to finally feel enough. But life keeps moving while they wait. One of the quietest forms of self-respect is accepting what someone continuously shows you instead of endlessly hoping they will become different. Acceptance does not mean bitterness. It does not mean hatred. It simply means seeing clearly. Clear seeing is liberation. You stop romanticizing suffering. You stop glorifying emotional inconsistency. You stop treating neglect as mystery. You stop confusing longing with destiny. And suddenly, relationships become much easier to understand. A person who values you creates emotional safety, not chronic confusion. A person who respects you does not repeatedly make you feel disposable. A person capable of healthy love does not require endless emotional chasing to offer basic care. The more deeply you understand this, the less attracted you become to relationships that require self-abandonment. Your standards change naturally, not because you become arrogant, not because you become cold, but because you finally understand the cost of chasing people who cannot truly see you. The cost was your peace, your confidence, your intuition, your emotional stability, your ability to relax, your relationship with yourself. And perhaps the saddest part is that many people only realize this after years of exhaustion. They finally notice how much of their life was spent trying to earn recognition from emotionally unavailable people while neglecting their own healing completely. But awareness changes everything. The moment you stop chasing external recognition, your energy begins returning to you. The attention that once flowed endlessly toward unavailable people begins flowing inward. You start caring about your own emotional needs. You start honoring your own exhaustion. You start protecting your own peace. And this changes the quality of your relationships entirely, because now you are no longer entering connections saying, "Please choose me so I can feel worthy." Now you are entering connections saying, "I already know my worth, and I will no longer abandon it for temporary validation." That is emotional freedom, not becoming immune to rejection, not pretending you no longer desire love, but no longer allowing another person's inability to see you determine how you see yourself. And perhaps that is one of the deepest Buddhist truths of all. The more desperately you chase recognition from people who cannot truly value you, the further you drift from inner peace. But the moment you stop begging emotionally blind people to confirm your worth, suffering begins loosening its grip. Because you finally understand something your wounded heart struggled to believe for a very long time. Your value was never waiting inside another person's recognition. It was waiting inside your own awareness all along. And this is where many people finally begin uncovering the deeper root of their suffering. Because the desperate need to be seen, chosen, valued, and emotionally recognized rarely begins in adulthood. Most of the time it began very early, long before relationships, long before heartbreak, long before rejection. It began in childhood, in quiet moments when emotional needs were ignored, misunderstood, minimized, or left unanswered. And without realizing it, many children grow into adults who spend their entire lives trying to earn the love they should have received freely. There is a kind of loneliness that exists even inside a home full of people. A child may have food, clothes, education, and shelter, yet still feel emotionally invisible. Emotional neglect is often difficult to recognize because it is not always loud or violent. Sometimes it looks like parents who were physically present but emotionally unavailable. Sometimes it looks like caregivers who dismissed feelings, ignored vulnerability, or only gave affection when the child performed well. A child does not need perfect parents to feel loved, but a child does need emotional safety. They need to feel seen, heard, comforted, understood, and emotionally accepted without constantly proving their worth. When these needs are repeatedly unmet, the child begins adapting in order to survive emotionally. This is where people-pleasing is often born. A child quickly notices what brings attention and what creates rejection. Some children learn that being quiet avoids conflict. Others discover that achievement earns praise. Some become caretakers because helping others creates connection. Others suppress emotions because vulnerability feels unsafe. The child slowly begins shaping their personality around emotional survival, and the tragic part is that these adaptations often continue long into adulthood. The adult may no longer be trying to survive childhood, but their nervous system still behaves as if love must be earned. So they overperform in relationships. They become overly available, overly patient, overly understanding, overly forgiving. They work endlessly to avoid disappointing people because somewhere deep inside, disappointment still feels emotionally dangerous. Many adults who compulsively people-please are not trying to manipulate others. They are trying to avoid abandonment. That is an important difference. They learned early that connection felt uncertain, so now they constantly monitor other people's emotions, reactions, and moods. They become hyper-aware of tension. They fear conflict intensely. They apologize quickly. They struggle to say no. They feel guilty for having needs. They often prioritize everyone else's comfort while neglecting their own emotional reality. And over time, this creates profound exhaustion, because constantly performing for love is emotionally draining. A person who overperforms for love often lives with a hidden fear. If I stop giving, helping, fixing, pleasing, understanding, sacrificing, or performing, people will stop loving me. This fear controls countless lives. Some people become perfectionists because mistakes once made them feel emotionally rejected. Others become emotionally selfless because selfishness was punished during childhood. Some become chronic achievers because success was the only time they received attention. Others become emotionally invisible because expressing pain created criticism instead of comfort. Children naturally blame themselves when emotional needs are unmet. A child does not usually think, "My caregivers are emotionally unavailable." Instead, the child thinks, "Something must be wrong with me." That belief quietly follows them into adulthood. So now, instead of naturally expecting love, they feel they must constantly earn it. Relationships become emotional workplaces where they continuously prove their value. They may become the reliable friend, the emotional caretaker, the peacemaker, the overachiever, the endlessly supportive partner. On the outside, they appear generous and selfless, but internally, many of them are terrified that if they stop performing, they will become unlovable. This is why people-pleasing is often not kindness alone. It is fear mixed with kindness. A person who genuinely gives from peace feels emotionally free, but a person who gives from fear often feels secretly resentful, exhausted, anxious, or emotionally empty afterward. Because they are not only giving, they are trying to secure attachment. They are trying to prevent rejection. They are trying to maintain emotional safety. And sadly, many people who overperform for love attract relationships where they are valued mostly for what they provide instead of who they are. This deepens the wound even more. The person may become the therapist in every friendship, the rescuer in every relationship, the dependable one everyone leans on. But inside, they often feel unseen themselves, because people may appreciate their usefulness without truly understanding their emotional pain. This creates a heartbreaking cycle. The more emotionally neglected someone felt as a child, the more likely they may become emotionally over-functioning as an adult. And the more they overfunction, the more they attract relationships where emotional imbalance becomes normal. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment grows strongest around unmet emotional hunger. A starving mind clings desperately because it fears emptiness, and childhood emotional neglect creates deep emotional hunger. The child grows up craving reassurance, validation, affection, and emotional certainty because these things once felt inconsistent or unavailable. This hunger can quietly shape every relationship afterward. A person may become addicted to feeling needed because usefulness once guaranteed attention. A person may fear boundaries because boundaries once threatened connection. A person may become deeply uncomfortable disappointing others because rejection once felt emotionally devastating. And often, they do not even realize these patterns are connected to childhood. They simply believe, "This is just who I am." But many personality traits are actually survival responses. There are adults walking around believing they are naturally self-sacrificing, when in reality they were conditioned to suppress themselves to maintain emotional safety. There are people who believe they are naturally easygoing when they actually learned to disconnect from their own needs because conflict felt dangerous growing up. Emotional neglect teaches children to abandon themselves quietly, not dramatically, not consciously, quietly. A child notices that sadness annoys people, so they stop expressing sadness. A child notices that anger creates punishment, so they stop expressing anger. A child notices that achievement brings praise, so they become obsessed with success. A child notices that helping others creates approval, so they become compulsively responsible for everyone. These adaptations may help the child survive emotionally, but later they create adults who no longer know how to exist without performing. This creates deep identity confusion. Because when your personality was built around emotional survival, it becomes difficult to know who you truly are underneath all the adaptation. Many people-pleasers struggle to answer simple questions about themselves. What do they truly want? What genuinely makes them happy? What do they actually feel? What kind of relationships feel healthy to them? Often they are so focused on other people's emotions that they have lost touch with their own inner world completely. And this disconnect creates chronic anxiety. The nervous system remains in constant alertness because emotional safety still feels uncertain. The person may overthink conversations, analyze people's moods, fear disappointing others, and struggle deeply with criticism. Even small disapproval can feel emotionally overwhelming because it unconsciously activates old childhood wounds. A simple "I'm upset with you" may feel catastrophic. Not because the current situation is unbearable, but because the nervous system remembers older pain. Children who grow up emotionally neglected often become adults who cannot relax inside love. They are always scanning for signs of withdrawal, disappointment, or abandonment. They may struggle to believe people genuinely care about them without conditions, so they continue overgiving in order to maintain connection. This is why some people feel anxious when receiving love without earning it. Healthy love feels unfamiliar because they are used to transactional love. Love that required achievement, love that required usefulness, love that required emotional suppression. But real love does not require constant self-erasure. One of the most painful effects of emotional neglect is that people become disconnected from their own emotional needs while becoming highly sensitive to everyone else's. They can notice another person's sadness instantly, but struggle to recognize their own exhaustion. They can comfort everyone around them while secretly feeling emotionally empty themselves. This creates loneliness that many people cannot explain. They are surrounded by people yet still feel unseen. Because being appreciated for what you do is not the same as being loved for who you are. And many overperformers secretly fear that without their usefulness, nobody would truly stay. This fear keeps them trapped in unhealthy cycles. They continue overextending themselves emotionally. They avoid asking for help. They suppress resentment. They tolerate imbalance. They carry emotional labor silently, and because they appear strong and dependable, others often fail to notice how deeply overwhelmed they actually are. But eventually, the soul becomes exhausted from carrying relationships alone. This exhaustion can appear as anxiety, burnout, depression, numbness, emotional withdrawal, chronic overthinking, or deep resentment. The person may not even realize why they feel so empty. They only know they are tired of constantly proving themselves, tired of always being the understanding one, tired of always giving more, tired of carrying everyone emotionally, tired of feeling guilty for having needs, tired of trying to earn what should not require performance in the first place. And this is where healing begins. Not by becoming selfish, not by rejecting love, but by finally understanding the origin of the wound. Because once you recognize that people-pleasing was a survival strategy, not your identity, you begin approaching yourself with compassion instead of shame. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start asking, "What happened to me emotionally?" That shift changes everything. Buddhist compassion is not only about forgiving others, it is also about seeing your own suffering clearly without judgment. Many people carry deep shame about their emotional patterns. They feel embarrassed for being needy, anxious, overly accommodating, or emotionally dependent. But shame only deepens the wound. Awareness heals what shame hides. The moment you recognize that your overperforming was once an attempt to secure love and safety, your relationship with yourself softens. You begin understanding why boundaries feel difficult, why conflict feels terrifying, why rejection feels overwhelming, why rest feels guilty, why saying no feels dangerous. Your nervous system was trained to associate self-protection with emotional risk. That is not weakness. That is conditioning, and conditioning can be healed. Healing begins with small acts of emotional honesty. You begin noticing when you are saying yes while internally feeling no. You notice when you are over-explaining to avoid disappointing someone. You notice when you are exhausting yourself trying to keep relationships stable. You notice when guilt appears every time you prioritize your own needs. These moments matter because awareness slowly breaks unconscious patterns. At first, setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable. You may fear people becoming upset. You may feel selfish for resting. You may feel guilty for not rescuing everyone emotionally. But discomfort does not mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes discomfort simply means you are no longer abandoning yourself automatically. And this is deeply important, because many people were taught to betray themselves so consistently that self-respect initially feels unfamiliar. Healing also requires grieving. Grieving the childhood emotional safety you deserved but may not have received. Grieving the years spent performing for love. Grieving the relationships built around your usefulness instead of mutual care. Grieving the exhaustion of constantly carrying everyone while secretly feeling alone. Grief is painful, but it creates space for truth. And the truth is this: your worth was never supposed to depend on how useful, agreeable, successful, or emotionally available you could become for others. You were always worthy of love before the performance began. This realization can feel both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful because it reconnects you to your humanity. Heartbreaking because it reveals how long you have lived, believing you needed to earn your right to be loved. Many emotionally neglected adults become extremely compassionate people because they know what emotional pain feels like. But compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. You can care deeply about others without sacrificing your own emotional health completely. This balance is part of emotional maturity. The Buddhist path teaches the middle way. Not emotional coldness, not endless self-sacrifice, balance, awareness, compassion that includes yourself too. And perhaps for the first time in your life you begin realizing that your emotions matter even when they inconvenience others. Your exhaustion matters, your boundaries matter, your inner peace matters. Your needs matter, not because someone else validates them, but because you are human. The more you heal childhood emotional neglect, the less desperate you become for approval. You stop trying to perform your way into love. You stop over-functioning in every relationship. You stop believing your value depends on endless sacrifice. And something very quiet but very powerful begins happening inside you. You start relaxing. You stop feeling responsible for everyone's emotions. You stop trying to rescue people who refuse to heal themselves. You stop apologizing for needing rest. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain connection. You stop confusing exhaustion with love. And slowly, your relationships begin changing too. Because now, you are no longer attracting connection through self-abandonment. You are learning how to connect through honesty, through balance, through emotional reciprocity, through self-respect. And this may feel unfamiliar at first. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist the new version of you. Some may call you distant, some may call you selfish, some may become uncomfortable when you stop over-giving endlessly. But healthy love does not punish you for healing. Healthy love adjusts with you. The more deeply you reconnect with yourself, the less you need to perform for acceptance. You begin understanding that real love does not require constant emotional labor to sustain itself. Real love allows you to breathe, to rest, to be imperfect, to exist without earning your humanity every single day. And perhaps this is one of the deepest forms of freedom, no longer needing to become someone else just to deserve connection. No longer exhausting yourself trying to secure love through performance. No longer abandoning your own soul to keep others comfortable, because eventually you realize something life-changing. The child inside you was never asking to become perfect. They were only asking to feel loved without having to disappear first. And this is where the wound becomes even more confusing, because when a child grows up feeling loved mostly for what they do, they often become an adult who mistakes usefulness for love. They do not simply want connection, they want to be needed, because being needed feels safer than simply being loved. Being needed gives them a role, a place, a reason someone might stay. But slowly this becomes another quiet form of self-abandonment. There is a painful truth many people do not want to face. Sometimes people do not love you as deeply as they need you. They need your support. They need your patience. They need your emotional labor. They need your listening ear. They need your forgiveness. They need your presence when life becomes difficult. But needing what you provide is not the same as loving who you are. This is why some relationships feel full of activity but empty of intimacy. You are always helping, always fixing, always showing up, always making things easier for someone else, yet deep inside you still feel unseen. The relationship looks close from the outside, but inside your heart there is a strange loneliness. You are important to them, yes, but mostly because of what you carry for them. That kind of importance can become addictive. When someone has spent years feeling emotionally invisible, being needed can feel like proof that they matter. It can feel comforting when people call them first, depend on them, ask for help, seek advice, or collapse into their arms during hard times. They may feel tired, but they also feel valuable. And that is where the confusion begins. Because the heart starts saying, if they need me this much, they must love me. But need is not always love. Need can be attachment. Need can be convenience. Need can be emotional dependence. Need can be habit. Need can be someone using your strength because they do not want to develop their own. And if you are not careful, you can spend years confusing someone's dependence on you with genuine care for you. Genuine love does not only reach for you when there is a problem. It does not only value you when you are useful. It does not only come alive when someone needs saving, soothing, advising, forgiving, or supporting. Genuine love also wants to know your heart. It asks how you are. It notices when you are tired. It cares about your inner world even when you are not solving anyone's crisis. Many people do not know this difference because they were trained to be emotionally useful very early. Maybe they were the child who had to keep peace in the house. Maybe they became the responsible one before they were old enough to understand responsibility. Maybe they had to comfort adults who should have been comforting them. Maybe they learned that their sadness was ignored, but their helpfulness was praised. So now, as adults, they feel uneasy when they are not needed. Rest feels empty. Receiving feels uncomfortable. Being loved without doing anything feels suspicious. They may even unconsciously choose relationships where people depend on them too much because imbalance feels familiar. This is how emotional usefulness becomes a substitute for intimacy. A person may become the one everyone depends on, yet nobody truly checks on. They may become the strong one, the wise one, the forgiving one, the calm one, the available one. But strength can become a cage when nobody allows you to be human inside it. Sometimes people call you strong because it benefits them when you do not ask for support. Sometimes people praise your patience because it allows them to keep testing it. Sometimes people admire your kindness because it lets them keep taking from it. And if your self-worth is attached to being needed, you may not notice the imbalance until exhaustion becomes your normal state. This is where Buddhist awareness becomes important. Buddhism teaches us to look beneath appearances, not to judge with bitterness, but to observe clearly. The mind must learn to ask, is this love or is this attachment? Is this connection or is this dependence? Is this mutual care or am I being valued only because I make someone else's life easier? These questions can feel uncomfortable because they reveal hidden truths. Some relationships survive because one person keeps carrying all the emotional weight. One person always understands. One person always forgives. One person always reaches out. One person always adjusts. One person always makes room. And the relationship continues, not because it is healthy, but because one person keeps abandoning themselves to keep it alive. This is not love. This is emotional labor without balance. Real connection has movement in both directions. You give, but you also receive. You listen, but you are also heard. You support, but you are also supported. You make space, but space is also made for you. When love is real, you do not have to disappear behind your usefulness. The problem is that people who confuse being needed with being loved often fear what will happen if they stop overgiving. They wonder, if I stop helping, will they still call? If I stop fixing, will they still care? If I stop being available, will they still want me? If I stop rescuing, will there be anything left between us? That question can be painful because sometimes the answer exposes the truth. There are relationships where the bond is built more on service than love. The moment you stop over-functioning, the connection becomes weak. The moment you set a boundary, the warmth disappears. The moment you need support, the other person becomes uncomfortable. The moment you stop being useful, you realize how little emotional intimacy was actually there. This realization hurts, but it also frees you, because you finally understand that being needed is not the same as being cherished. To be cherished means someone values your presence, not just your performance. They enjoy your being, not just your doing. They care about your peace, not just your availability. They do not only come close when their life is falling apart. They also remain close when you have nothing to offer except your honest self. This is the kind of love many overgivers secretly long for, but rarely allow themselves to receive. Because receiving requires trust. And for someone who learned to earn love through usefulness, receiving love without performance can feel unsafe. They may not know how to relax when someone simply cares for them. They may feel guilty when someone helps them. They may rush to repay kindness because unearned affection feels uncomfortable. They may turn every relationship into a silent transaction because unconditional care feels unfamiliar. This is why healing requires learning how to be loved without constantly proving your value. At first, this may feel strange. You may feel restless when you are not fixing anything. You may feel guilty when you say no. You may feel anxious when you let people handle their own emotions. You may feel selfish when you choose rest over rescue. But these feelings do not mean you are doing something wrong. They may simply mean you are stepping out of an old survival role. Your nervous system may confuse peace with danger because chaos and responsibility once felt normal. But peace is not danger. Balance is not selfishness. Boundaries are not cruelty. And allowing people to solve their own problems is not abandonment. Many people who are addicted to being needed secretly carry the belief that love must be maintained through constant usefulness. They think, if I am not helpful, I am replaceable. So they become irreplaceable through exhaustion. They become the person nobody can function without. And while this gives them a temporary sense of importance, it also traps them in emotional slavery, because now their value depends on other people's dependency. If everyone is fine, they feel unnecessary. If nobody needs them, they feel invisible. If someone becomes independent, they may feel abandoned. This is one of the hidden signs that usefulness has become tied to identity. A healthy person feels happy when others grow stronger, but someone whose worth depends on being needed may feel secretly anxious when others no longer rely on them. Not because they are bad, but because dependency has become their source of emotional security. This is why Buddhist teachings on non-attachment are so powerful. Non-attachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop needing others to need you in order to feel real. You can love people, support them, and show kindness without making their dependence the foundation of your identity. True compassion helps without clinging. It gives without secretly demanding emotional proof in return. It supports without needing to control the outcome. It loves without turning itself into a sacrifice altar. There is a difference between compassion and self-erasure. Compassion says, I care about your suffering. Self-erasure says, your suffering matters more than my existence. Compassion creates connection. Self-erasure creates resentment. Many overgivers do not admit their resentment because they feel guilty for having it. But resentment is often a signal that your boundaries have been crossed for too long. It is not always a sign that you are unkind. Sometimes it is your inner self saying, "I am tired of being used as a source while nobody asks if I am empty." Resentment grows when giving is no longer free. It grows when giving becomes pressured, expected, unnoticed, or one-sided. It grows when you keep saying yes while your soul is quietly saying no. This is why honest giving must come from freedom, not fear. When you give from freedom, your heart remains open. When you give from fear, your heart becomes tired. When you give because you choose to, there is peace. When you give because you are afraid they will leave if you do not, there is suffering. The same action can come from two very different places. You can help someone from love, or you can help them because you are afraid of being unwanted. You can support someone from compassion, or you can support them because you fear losing your role. You can be generous from fullness, or you can be generous because you believe your worth depends on being useful. The outside may look the same, but the inner experience is completely different. This is why awareness matters. Buddhist practice asks you to look at the root of your actions, not only what you do, but why you do it. Are you helping from peace or from anxiety? Are you saying yes from love or from fear? Are you staying because there is mutual care or because being needed makes you feel less alone? These questions return power to you. They help you stop living automatically. Many people do not realize that some of their kindness is actually a trauma response. They rush to fix discomfort. They cannot tolerate people being upset with them. They feel responsible for everyone's emotions. They over-apologize, they over-explain, they over-give. And then they call it being loving. But love does not require you to become emotionally responsible for everyone. You can care without carrying. You can listen without absorbing. You can help without becoming the foundation of someone else's life. You can love without losing yourself. This is difficult for people who have been praised their whole lives for being dependable. Society often rewards overgiving. People will call you selfless while quietly benefiting from your lack of boundaries. They will say, "You are always there for everyone," without noticing that no one is always there for you. And sometimes being the needed one becomes a mask for deep loneliness. Because if people need you, at least they come close. Even if they do not truly see you. Even if they do not ask how your heart is doing. Even if they only reach out when they need something. At least you are not forgotten. This is the emotional bargain many wounded people make. They accept usefulness because intimacy feels uncertain. They accept being relied on because being truly loved feels unfamiliar. They accept being needed because being chosen for who they are feels too risky to hope for. But the soul eventually grows tired of being valued only as a function. You were not born merely to be someone's emotional emergency room. You were not born only to absorb pain, solve problems, give advice, offer comfort, and keep others steady. You are not just useful, you are human. And that means you deserve care that does not depend on how much you provide. When someone truly loves you, they do not reduce you to your usefulness. They do not only celebrate your strength, they are also gentle with your weakness. They do not only come to you for comfort, they offer comfort too. They do not only enjoy what you give, they care about what it costs you. This is how you know the difference between being needed and being loved. Need takes. Love receives and gives back. Need often becomes urgent when there is a problem. Love remains present even in quiet moments. Need may disappear when you stop providing. Love stays curious about who you are beyond what you do. Need says, "I cannot function without you." Love says, "I value you even when you are not doing anything for me." That difference can change your life. Because once you see it clearly, you stop confusing emotional dependency with devotion. You stop feeling flattered when someone cannot function without you. You stop romanticizing imbalance. You stop calling exhaustion intimacy. You stop making yourself necessary to people who have no intention of loving you well. Healing begins when you allow yourself to ask for reciprocity, not perfection, not constant attention, not unrealistic emotional service, but reciprocity. A relationship where your needs are allowed to exist. A relationship where your feelings are not treated like a burden. A relationship where care does not flow only in one direction. A relationship where you do not have to become a tool to earn closeness. At first, asking for reciprocity may feel frightening. You may worry that people will leave if you stop being endlessly available. But if a relationship only survives when you abandon yourself, losing it may not be a loss. It may be the beginning of your freedom. This does not mean you stop being kind. It means your kindness becomes wiser. Kindness with awareness, kindness with boundaries, kindness that includes yourself, kindness that no longer sacrifices your peace to maintain someone else's comfort. And slowly, you begin stepping out of the role of being needed and into the experience of being known. Being known is different. Being known means someone sees your patterns, your fears, your dreams, your quiet pain, your humor, your tenderness, your exhaustion, and your humanity. They do not only know what you can do for them, they know what makes your eyes tired. They know when your silence means you are overwhelmed. They know how to care without being asked every single time. This is genuine connection, not dependence, not convenience, not emotional consumption, connection. And that is what the heart was always searching for. Many people who confuse being needed with being loved have never been properly held emotionally. They have been relied upon, praised, admired, and depended on, but not truly held. Not truly asked, "What about you?" Not truly allowed to fall apart without becoming a burden. So healing may feel like learning a new language. The language of receiving. The language of saying, "I need support too." The language of letting others show up. The language of no longer earning your place through overperformance. The language of believing you are still valuable when you are resting. This is the quiet revolution of self-worth. You stop offering your exhaustion as proof of love. You stop turning every relationship into a rescue mission. You stop confusing someone's need for your energy with their love for your soul. And something inside you begins to soften, because now you understand that you do not have to be indispensable to be worthy. You do not have to be constantly useful to deserve closeness. You do not have to be the strong one forever. You do not have to carry people in order to keep them. The people meant for your life will not only need what you provide, they will cherish who you are. And when you finally experience that kind of connection, it will not feel like panic, pressure, or performance. It will feel like breathing after years of holding your breath. It will feel like being allowed to exist. It will feel like love that does not demand your disappearance. And maybe that is what your heart has needed all along, not to be needed more, but to be loved without having to become useful first. And this is where the longing to be loved can become even more dangerous. Because once someone has spent years trying to feel valued, needed, and chosen, romance can begin to feel like salvation. Not just affection, not just connection, salvation. A person enters your life, gives you attention, makes your heart feel awake again, and suddenly the old emptiness becomes quieter. But if you are not careful, the same love you thought would heal you can slowly become the place where you disappear. There is a kind of romantic obsession that does not announce itself as obsession. It arrives softly. It feels like excitement. It feels like deep connection. It feels like destiny. You think about them when you wake up. You check your phone more often. You replay conversations. You remember small details. You wonder what they meant by a word, a pause, a delay, a smile, a change in tone. At first it feels sweet, it feels human, it feels like love. But slowly, something begins to shift. Your inner world starts orbiting around one person, and without noticing it, you begin leaving yourself behind. This is the silent self-abandonment hidden inside romantic obsession. It is not always dramatic. It does not always look like begging or chasing. Sometimes it looks like waiting too long for someone who gives too little. Sometimes it looks like losing interest in your own life because their attention has become the most important event of your day. Sometimes it looks like making excuses for behavior you would have once called hurtful. Sometimes it looks like becoming less honest with yourself because the truth might force you to let go. Romantic obsession often begins when someone becomes a mirror for the worth you have not yet learned to feel within yourself. Their desire makes you feel special. Their attention makes you feel visible. Their affection makes you feel chosen. And because those feelings are powerful, the mind begins to attach to the person who produces them. You are no longer simply enjoying love. You are depending on this person to keep your inner emptiness quiet. That is when love becomes dangerous. Not because love itself is wrong, but because craving turns love into emotional dependence. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering begins when the mind clings tightly to something impermanent. And romance is one of the easiest places for the mind to cling, because romantic attention can feel intoxicating. It touches old wounds. It awakens old hopes. It makes the lonely parts of you believe, finally, I am safe. Finally, I am wanted. Finally, I matter. But when one person becomes the proof that you matter, their absence becomes proof that you do not. This is why romantic obsession can make someone feel powerful one moment and completely broken the next. A kind message can lift their whole mood. A delayed response can ruin their peace. A warm conversation can make life feel meaningful. A cold reply can make them question their entire value. Their emotional world becomes controlled by another person's availability. And slowly, self-respect begins to weaken. You may start accepting less than you deserve because the fear of losing them feels stronger than the pain of being mistreated. You may start changing your boundaries because you do not want to seem difficult. You may start hiding your needs because you fear becoming too much. You may start tolerating confusion because clarity might end the fantasy. And once fantasy becomes more comforting than truth, self-abandonment has already begun. One of the clearest signs of romantic obsession is when your peace becomes dependent on their behavior. You cannot relax until they respond. You cannot enjoy your day until you know where you stand. You cannot focus because your mind keeps returning to them. You cannot feel secure unless they reassure you. You become emotionally suspended, waiting for another person to decide whether you are okay. That is not peace. That is attachment. And attachment often disguises itself as deep love. People say, I cannot stop thinking about them, as if constant mental fixation proves connection. But sometimes constant thinking does not mean love is deep. Sometimes it means your nervous system does not feel safe. Sometimes it means uncertainty has become addictive. Sometimes it means the relationship is activating a wound, not nourishing your soul. Healthy love may make you think of someone with warmth, but it should not make you abandon your entire inner balance. Healthy love may create longing, but it should not erase your identity. Healthy love may matter deeply, but it should not become the only thing that gives your life meaning. When romantic obsession takes over, your own life begins to fade into the background. Your goals become less important. Your friendships receive less attention. Your routines weaken. Your spiritual practice becomes inconsistent. Your emotional stability depends on whether one person gives you enough reassurance. You begin living less from your center and more from their reactions. This is how identity erodes, not in one moment, but through repeated self-neglect. You stop asking, "What do I need today?" and start asking, "What will make them want me more?" You stop asking, "Is this relationship healthy for me?" and start asking, "How can I keep it from ending?" You stop asking, "Am I at peace?" and start asking, "Do they still feel the same?" Your attention becomes captured. Your inner world becomes crowded. Your own voice becomes quieter. And the painful truth is, obsession often feeds on uncertainty. When someone is consistent, respectful, clear, and emotionally present, the nervous system can settle. But when someone is hot and cold, close and distant, affectionate and unavailable, the mind becomes trapped in trying to solve them. Their inconsistency creates emotional hunger. You keep waiting for the good version of them to return. You keep hoping the next conversation will restore the closeness you felt before. This pattern can feel like love, but it often works like a trap. The small moments of affection become powerful because they come after emotional distance. A message after silence feels like relief. Kindness after confusion feels like hope. Apology after hurt feels like renewal. The relationship becomes a cycle of pain and reward, and the reward feels stronger because the pain came first. This is why people can become attached to relationships that are hurting them. They are not addicted to the peace. There may not be much peace. They are addicted to the relief, and relief is not the same as love. Relief says, "The anxiety has stopped for now." Love says, "I feel safe being myself here." Relief says, "They finally came back." Love says, "I do not have to lose myself to be close." Relief says, "Maybe I still matter." Love says, "My worth was never in question." When you understand this difference, you begin seeing romantic obsession more clearly. It is often not about the person alone. It is about what the person represents. They represent being chosen. They represent emotional rescue. They represent proof that you are desirable. They represent the hope that old wounds can finally be healed by someone outside you. But no person can carry that kind of spiritual responsibility for you. Another person can love you, but they cannot become your self-worth. They can hold your hand, but they cannot become your inner ground. They can appreciate you, but they cannot permanently silence the belief that you are not enough. If that belief lives inside you, it will keep demanding proof from every relationship you enter. This is why Buddhist teaching points us back inward. It does not tell us to reject love. It teaches us not to turn love into clinging, because once love becomes clinging, fear enters. Once fear enters, control follows. Once control follows, suffering grows. You begin trying to control how they see you. You control your words. You control your emotions. You control your availability. You control how much you reveal. You control your reactions so they do not leave. But the more you try to control the relationship, the less natural and peaceful it becomes. You stop being present. You start performing. And romantic obsession is often performance, wearing the mask of devotion. You become the version of yourself you think they will choose, more patient than you truly feel, more forgiving than your heart is ready to be, more available than your energy allows, more silent than your truth deserves. You edit yourself to preserve the connection and then wonder why you feel lonely inside it. Because being loved for a version of you that is not real will never feel deeply safe. Your soul knows when it is hiding. It knows when you are pretending. It knows when you are swallowing your pain to keep someone close. And over time, this creates inner resentment. You may still want the person, but part of you begins feeling angry, not only at them, but at yourself. Angry that you keep waiting. Angry that you keep tolerating. Angry that you keep checking. Angry that you keep accepting less. Angry that you keep losing sleep over someone who may not be losing sleep over you. This anger is not always destructive. Sometimes it is your self-respect trying to wake up. It is the part of you saying, "Enough. I was not born to orbit another person until I forget my own sky." But many people fear that anger because it threatens the attachment. If they listen to their anger, they may have to set a boundary. If they set a boundary, the person may pull away. If the person pulls away, the old fear of being unwanted may return. So they suppress the anger and call it patience. But suppressed truth does not disappear. It becomes anxiety. It becomes tension. It becomes emotional exhaustion. It becomes the quiet feeling that something is wrong, even when you keep telling yourself everything is fine. This is how romantic obsession slowly damages peace. The mind becomes busy all the time. It searches for signs. It reads between lines. It creates stories. It worries about replacement. It compares itself to others. It remembers every tender moment and ignores every painful pattern. It clings to potential because reality is too difficult to accept. And soon, the person is no longer simply someone you love. They become the center of your emotional weather. If they are warm, your world feels bright. If they are distant, your world turns dark. If they choose you, you feel alive. If they pull away, you feel abandoned. This is not because you are weak. It is because attachment has wrapped itself around an old wound. The wound says, "If I can make this person love me, then maybe I will finally be enough." But this is the illusion that keeps many people suffering. You were already enough before they appeared, and you remain enough if they leave. The mind may not believe this at first because obsession narrows perception. It makes one person seem larger than life. It makes their approval feel rare, sacred, irreplaceable. It convinces you that no one else will understand you, desire you, or touch your heart this way again. But often, obsession speaks in extremes because it is fueled by fear. Fear says, "This is your only chance." Wisdom says, "Love that costs your self-respect is too expensive." Fear says, "Hold on tighter." Wisdom says, "What is meant for your peace will not require constant panic." Fear says, "Become what they want." Wisdom says, "The right love meets you where you are real." This is why mindfulness is so important in romantic attachment. Mindfulness creates space between the craving and the action. You may feel the urge to chase, but you pause. You may feel the urge to over-explain, but you breathe. You may feel the urge to check your phone again, but you return to your body. You may feel the urge to abandon your boundary, but you ask, "What part of me is afraid right now?" That question brings you back to yourself, because obsession pulls your awareness outward. Healing brings it inward. Instead of asking only, "Do they want me?" you begin asking, "What is happening inside me when I feel unsure?" Instead of asking, "How do I make them stay?" you ask, "Why does their distance make me feel like I am disappearing?" Instead of asking, "What do they feel?" you ask, "What do I feel when I stop trying to impress them?" These questions are powerful because they break the spell. Romantic obsession thrives when you avoid yourself. It grows when all your attention is placed on the other person. Their thoughts, their feelings, their choices, their patterns, their past, their wounds, their reasons. But healing begins when you bring attention back to your own experience. How does this connection affect your nervous system? Do you feel more peaceful or more anxious? Do you feel more yourself or less yourself? Do you feel safe to express needs? Do you feel respected when you set boundaries? Do you feel emotionally nourished or mostly consumed? These questions reveal what fantasy tries to hide. And sometimes the answer will hurt. You may realize you are not in love with the reality of the person. You are attached to the feeling of being chosen by them. You are attached to the version of them that appears during good moments. You are attached to the dream of what the relationship could become if they finally changed. But loving potential can become a prison. Potential is not presence. Potential is not consistency. Potential is not respect. Potential is not emotional safety. Potential is not love. You can actually live inside. Many people lose years to someone's potential. They keep waiting for the person to become the version they saw in the beginning. They keep believing that if they love harder, the person will soften. If they stay longer, the person will commit. If they prove themselves more, the person will finally see their worth. But love is not supposed to be an audition that never ends. When you constantly feel you must earn your place in someone's life, your self-respect slowly weakens. You may begin accepting uncertainty as normal. You may begin thinking inconsistency is all you deserve. You may begin feeling grateful for small attention because you have become used to emotional hunger. This is why self-worth must become stronger than romantic craving. Without self-worth, desire can easily become surrender. You surrender your time, peace, values, boundaries, and dignity to keep closeness alive. But with self-worth, you can love someone deeply and still refuse to disappear for them. This is not easy. Sometimes the heart wants what the soul knows is not safe. Sometimes the body craves the person who triggers anxiety. Sometimes the mind keeps returning to memories because memories feel sweeter than reality. But spiritual maturity means learning to honor truth even when attachment protests. Buddhist wisdom teaches that feelings are real, but they are not always commands. A feeling can arise, stay for a while, and pass. You can miss someone without returning to what broke you. You can love someone without sacrificing yourself. You can desire someone without making them your center. You can feel pain without obeying panic. This is freedom, not the absence of emotion, but the ability to remain conscious inside emotion. The more conscious you become, the more you notice the small ways obsession tries to pull you away from yourself. You notice when you stop eating well because you are anxious. You notice when you neglect your work because you are distracted. You notice when you cancel your own plans to remain available. You notice when you dress, speak, post, or behave mainly to be noticed by them. You notice when your joy depends on their reaction. These moments are invitations, not invitations to shame yourself, but invitations to return. Return to your breath. Return to your body. Return to your own life. Return to the friendships you neglected. Return to the dreams you paused. Return to the practices that ground you. Return to the quiet dignity that existed before obsession made you forget it. Because one of the most healing things you can do during romantic obsession is rebuild a life that does not revolve around one person. This is not punishment. This is restoration. You begin filling your days with things that belong to you, your routines, your goals, your creative energy, your spiritual practice, your body, your rest, your laughter, your learning, your friendships, your solitude. Slowly, the person becomes part of your life instead of the center of your life. And if they cannot remain when you become whole, then perhaps they were only comfortable when you were easier to control through longing. That is another painful truth. Some people benefit when you are obsessed with them. They enjoy your availability. They enjoy your attention. They enjoy your emotional dependence. They may not want to fully love you, but they also do not want to lose the comfort of being loved by you. So they give just enough to keep you attached, but not enough to make you secure. This is where your self-respect must become awake. You must learn to recognize when someone enjoys being wanted more than they value being responsible with your heart. Because not everyone who accepts your love is capable of honoring it. And not everyone who desires your presence is offering genuine connection. When you begin seeing clearly, you may grieve. You may grieve the fantasy. You may grieve the version of yourself who waited, chased, hoped, and overgave. You may grieve the time you spent treating someone else as the answer to your emptiness. But this grief is not the end of you. It is the return of you. Every illusion that breaks can become a doorway back to truth. You start realizing that love should expand your life, not shrink it. Love should deepen your peace, not destroy it. Love should support your growth, not pull you away from your own soul. Love should make room for your humanity, not reward only your performance. And most of all, love should not require you to abandon self-respect to keep access to affection. When you truly begin choosing yourself, romantic love changes. You stop looking for someone to rescue you from your emptiness. You stop making one person responsible for your worth. You stop confusing obsession with devotion. You stop mistaking anxiety for depth. You begin wanting a love that feels steady, a love where you can breathe, a love where your body feels safe, a love where your truth does not threaten the connection, a love where you are not constantly waiting for proof that you matter. And until that kind of love arrives, you learn to remain with yourself. This may be the hardest practice of all, to sit with longing without letting it rule you, to feel desire without becoming desperate, to miss someone without betraying yourself, to love someone without losing your center, to walk away when staying would cost your dignity. This is where self-worth becomes spiritual discipline, because choosing yourself is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. It is not sending the message. It is not checking again. It is not accepting the apology without changed behavior. It is not explaining your pain to someone committed to minimizing it. It is returning your attention to your own life, one breath at a time. And slowly, the obsession loses power. Not because you stopped caring overnight, but because you stopped feeding the attachment with self-abandonment. You stopped making them your emotional home. You stopped letting their attention decide your value. You stopped leaving yourself every time they became distant. And then something inside you becomes peaceful again. You remember that before them, you existed. During them, you still existed. After them, you will continue to exist. Your life is not a small room inside someone else's approval. Your life is vast. Your soul is deeper than one attachment. Your worth is older than one relationship. And perhaps this is the quiet Buddhist truth hidden inside romantic obsession. The person you keep chasing may not be the person you truly need to return to. The person you need to return to is yourself, the self you abandoned while waiting, the self you silenced while pleasing, the self you neglected while obsessing, the self you forgot while trying to be chosen. Because when you finally come back to that self, love no longer feels like losing your mind. It feels like meeting another person without leaving your own soul behind. And perhaps this is what romantic obsession was trying to hide all along. Beneath the chasing, the overthinking, the attachment, and the fear of losing someone, there was often a deeper fear waiting underneath it all. The fear of being alone. Because for many people, solitude does not feel peaceful. It feels unbearable. It feels like silence exposing every wound they spent years trying to escape through relationships, attention, and emotional attachment. There is a sadness many people carry that only appears when everything becomes quiet. No messages, no distractions, no conversations, no one needing them, no romantic excitement, no emotional stimulation, just themselves sitting alone with their own mind. And for some people, that silence feels heavier than heartbreak itself. This is why many people stay in relationships long after peace has disappeared. Not because the connection is healthy, but because loneliness feels terrifying. The relationship may create anxiety, confusion, emotional exhaustion, and pain, yet being alone still feels worse to them. At least in the relationship, there is distraction, there is hope, there is emotional activity. There is someone to think about instead of having to face themselves. The truth is, many people are not only afraid of solitude, they are afraid of what solitude will reveal. When life becomes quiet, unresolved wounds become louder. The emptiness they tried to silence through attention begins speaking again. The insecurity they covered with relationships begins returning. The unhealed loneliness from childhood begins surfacing. And because these feelings are uncomfortable, people often rush back toward noise, toward relationships, toward validation, toward emotional attachment, toward anything that helps them avoid sitting alone with themselves for too long. But avoidance does not heal emptiness. It only delays the encounter. Buddhist teachings often describe how the human mind constantly seeks escape from discomfort. The mind runs toward stimulation because stillness forces awareness, and awareness can feel frightening when someone has spent years avoiding their inner world. Solitude becomes painful, not because being alone is inherently wrong, but because many people have never learned how to feel emotionally safe within themselves. This is one of the deepest hidden wounds behind the need to be chosen. Some people do not only want love, they want relief from themselves. That is why attention can feel addictive. The moment someone desires them, the emptiness softens temporarily. The moment someone texts them, they feel less invisible. The moment someone needs them, they feel less forgotten. The moment someone chooses them, they feel less worthless. But when the relationship disappears, all the old pain returns stronger because the relationship was being used as emotional medication instead of genuine connection. This is why some breakups feel like identity collapse. It is not only grief over losing a person. It is grief over losing the emotional distraction that protected them from confronting themselves. Suddenly, they are left alone with emotions they have avoided for years. And many people do not know how to be alone because they were never taught that solitude can be safe. Some children grow up in homes where being alone emotionally felt dangerous. Maybe silence meant rejection. Maybe isolation meant punishment. Maybe emotional distance from caregivers created deep insecurity. The child learned to associate connection with safety and aloneness with emotional abandonment. So later in life, being alone activates panic, not always obvious panic. Sometimes it appears as restlessness, constant social media scrolling, jumping quickly from relationship to relationship, needing constant background noise, feeling anxious without messages or interaction, overcommitting socially, obsessing over someone unavailable, unable to relax without external stimulation. These behaviors often look ordinary, but underneath them may be a deep fear of emotional emptiness. Some people cannot sit quietly for even a short period without feeling discomfort. The mind immediately searches for distraction because silence feels too exposing. When there is nobody around to validate them, they begin questioning their worth. Without attention, they feel invisible. Without romantic interest, they feel undesirable. Without social interaction, they feel emotionally disconnected from existence itself. This is why solitude can feel so painful for emotionally wounded people. Solitude removes external mirrors, and when someone has built their identity mostly through other people's reactions, they may not know who they are without those reflections. This creates a terrifying inner question. Who am I when nobody is choosing me? Many people never stop long enough to answer that question honestly. Instead, they keep searching for another relationship, another crush, another conversation, another emotional attachment. Not because they are shallow, but because stillness forces them to confront the parts of themselves they have spent years abandoning. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something radically different about solitude. It teaches that peace is not found by escaping yourself, but by becoming deeply present with yourself. The path toward inner completeness does not begin with finding the perfect person. It begins with learning how to remain with your own mind without running away. This sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest things a human being can do. To sit alone without needing distraction, to feel sadness without immediately escaping it, to experience loneliness without treating it as proof of worthlessness, to exist without constant validation, to breathe without needing someone else's attention to feel alive. Most people have never truly practiced this. They have practiced attachment, they have practiced emotional dependency, they have practiced avoidance, but they have not practiced presence. Presence means learning how to stay connected to yourself, even when nobody else is nearby. It means learning how to care for your inner world instead of constantly outsourcing comfort to others. It means understanding that loneliness is often not the absence of people, but the absence of connection with yourself. A person can be surrounded by relationships and still feel empty, and another person can sit alone, peacefully, because they have built a relationship with their own spirit. This is the difference between isolation and solitude. Isolation feels like abandonment. Solitude feels like presence. Isolation says, "Nobody wants me." Solitude says, "I am learning to remain with myself." Isolation feels like punishment. Solitude becomes healing. But reaching peaceful solitude requires confronting uncomfortable truths. Many people discover during solitude how disconnected they have become from themselves. They realize they do not know what genuinely makes them happy. They realize they have spent years adapting to others. They realize they cannot relax without emotional stimulation. They realize they constantly seek distraction because silence makes unresolved emotions rise to the surface. And this realization can feel overwhelming at first, because once the distractions disappear, the hidden pain becomes visible. The grief they never processed, the rejection they never healed, the childhood loneliness they buried, the fear of not being enough, the exhaustion from constantly performing for love. All of it begins surfacing. This is why many people return to unhealthy relationships repeatedly. The relationship may hurt them, but solitude forces them to meet themselves. And for someone disconnected from their inner world, that can feel terrifying. But avoiding yourself only deepens suffering. Buddhist practice teaches that freedom comes through awareness, not avoidance. The emotions you keep running from continue controlling you unconsciously. The fears you refuse to face continue shaping your relationships. The emptiness you try to escape continues growing underneath the distractions. Healing begins the moment you stop running, not because it feels comfortable immediately, but because truth finally has space to breathe. At first, solitude may feel deeply uncomfortable. You may feel restless without constant interaction. You may reach for your phone automatically. You may feel anxious when nobody is texting you. You may crave emotional stimulation because your nervous system became addicted to external validation. This is normal. The mind that constantly seeks distraction behaves similarly to the body withdrawing from addiction. There is agitation, craving, restlessness, emotional discomfort, because the nervous system has learned to depend on outside input for emotional regulation. But if you remain present gently, something slowly begins changing. The silence becomes less threatening. The mind becomes less noisy. The need for constant reassurance weakens. You begin hearing your own thoughts more clearly. You begin noticing your own emotions instead of suppressing them. You begin rediscovering your own energy separate from other people's expectations. And slowly, solitude stops feeling like abandonment. It begins feeling like return. This is one of the most important spiritual shifts a person can experience. The moment being alone no longer feels like proof that you are unworthy. Because once that fear weakens, relationships stop controlling you in the same way. You no longer stay out of desperation. You no longer chase out of panic. You no longer tolerate disrespect simply to avoid loneliness. You no longer confuse attention with love. Because now your emotional survival no longer depends entirely on external connection. This creates an entirely different kind of strength. Not aggressive strength, not emotional numbness. Quiet inner stability. the kind of stability that allows you to love without collapsing, to connect without clinging, to miss someone without abandoning yourself, to experience rejection without losing your identity. This is the Buddhist path toward inner completeness, not perfection, not becoming emotionally detached from humanity, but becoming rooted enough within yourself that your worth survives solitude. Many people spend years trying to fill an internal emptiness with external people. But no person can permanently complete someone who feels fundamentally disconnected from themselves. Even loving relationships become exhausting when one person expects the other to constantly heal their loneliness. This creates pressure inside relationships. The partner unconsciously becomes responsible for emotional regulation. They must constantly reassure, validate, comfort, and emotionally stabilize the other person. But no human being can permanently carry another person's unhealed emptiness. Eventually, both people become exhausted. This is why inner completeness matters. Inner completeness does not mean you never feel lonely. Human beings naturally desire connection. It simply means your identity no longer collapses in the absence of attention. You still appreciate love deeply, but you no longer treat relationships as your only source of emotional existence. This changes everything. You begin enjoying people instead of emotionally consuming them. You begin connecting from wholeness instead of desperation. You begin loving from peace instead of fear. And perhaps most importantly, you stop seeing solitude as evidence that something is wrong with you. There is a deep cultural fear around being alone. Society often treats relationships as proof of success and solitude as failure. People feel ashamed if they are single too long. They feel behind. They feel unwanted. They compare themselves constantly. But many people inside relationships are deeply lonely too. External partnership alone does not guarantee emotional fulfillment. A person who cannot sit peacefully with themselves will often carry inner emptiness into every relationship they enter. That emptiness then creates dependency, anxiety, jealousy, obsession, overthinking, and fear. But someone who learns inner stability brings a different energy into relationships. They are still capable of deep love, but they do not disappear inside attachment. They maintain connection with themselves while connecting with others. This balance is rare because many people were never taught emotional self-relationship. They were taught how to attract attention, how to impress, how to perform, how to avoid rejection, but not how to sit quietly with their own soul, not how to comfort themselves, not how to validate their own emotions, not how to create peace internally. This is why solitude becomes sacred during healing, not because you must isolate forever, but because solitude reveals where your relationship with yourself has been neglected. In solitude, you begin noticing what truly nourishes you, what calms your spirit, what drains your energy, what emotions you avoid, what fears keep repeating, what patterns continue controlling your choices. You begin becoming familiar with your own inner landscape. And at first, that landscape may feel painful. You may realize how much of your life revolved around avoiding loneliness. You may notice how often you settled for poor treatment because empty space felt unbearable. You may discover how dependent you became on validation. You may feel grief over how long you abandoned yourself chasing connection. But this awareness is not punishment. It is awakening. Because now you can begin rebuilding your relationship with yourself intentionally. You start creating routines that belong to you. You reconnect with your body. You reconnect with creativity. You reconnect with stillness. You reconnect with nature. You reconnect with spiritual practices that calm your nervous system. You reconnect with the parts of yourself that existed before desperation took over, and something remarkable begins happening. Your own company stops feeling empty. You begin laughing alone again, resting peacefully again, thinking clearly again, breathing deeply again. You stop treating silence like an enemy. And once solitude becomes peaceful, relationships lose their power to emotionally control you, because now you are no longer terrified of being alone. That fear was the chain. The fear of solitude keeps many people trapped in painful situations. It keeps them tolerating emotional neglect. It keeps them attached to unavailable people. It keeps them accepting crumbs of affection. It keeps them performing endlessly for validation. But when solitude becomes safe, the chain breaks. You stop asking, "Who will choose me?" and begin asking, "What kind of life feels true to my spirit?" You stop needing relationships to rescue you from yourself. You begin becoming someone capable of sitting with yourself lovingly. This changes your entire energy. People who are at peace alone no longer chase desperately. They no longer force connection. They no longer collapse when someone withdraws. They no longer see rejection as proof of worthlessness. They understand something deeper. Being alone is not the same as being incomplete. This realization creates enormous freedom. You stop treating every relationship like your final chance at love. You stop romanticizing emotional chaos. You stop abandoning your own peace to avoid temporary loneliness. And perhaps for the first time in your life, you realize that the emptiness you spent years trying to fill was never asking for another person. It was asking for your presence, your attention, your compassion, your honesty, your return. Because the deepest relationship you will ever have is not with someone who chooses you. It is with the self you meet when nobody else is around. And if you can learn to remain gently with that self, without shame, without panic, without needing constant escape, something beautiful happens. You stop fearing solitude. And once you stop fearing solitude, you stop settling for relationships that make you abandon your soul just to avoid being alone. That is the beginning of real freedom. Not needing another person to prove you are enough, but finally becoming present enough to realize you always were. And once a person becomes afraid of being alone, the need to be chosen can quietly take over their entire emotional life. They begin measuring their worth through attention, approval, affection, and validation from others. Every interaction starts carrying emotional weight. Every rejection feels personal. Every sign of acceptance feels temporarily relieving. And slowly, without realizing it, their nervous system becomes trapped inside a constant search for external confirmation that they are enough. At first, this may not look dangerous. It may simply look like caring too much about relationships, wanting reassurance or fearing rejection. But over time, the psychological cost becomes enormous, because constantly trying to be chosen slowly exhausts the mind, weakens identity, and disconnects people from inner peace. There is a kind of emotional tiredness that sleep cannot fix. A deep exhaustion created by constantly monitoring how others feel about you. Some people wake up already anxious about how they are perceived. They replay conversations. They analyze facial expressions. They worry about whether they sounded strange, annoying, emotional, unattractive, or unimportant. Their mind rarely rests because their sense of safety depends too heavily on external reactions. This is one of the hidden consequences of validation addiction. The nervous system becomes hyper-alert. Instead of living naturally, the person begins emotionally scanning the world for signs of approval or rejection. Their attention is no longer rooted inside themselves. It is scattered outward constantly, searching for reassurance. And this creates chronic anxiety. The mind never fully relaxes because approval is unstable. People's moods change. Attention shifts. Responses vary. Human beings are inconsistent by nature. So a person who depends on validation for emotional security ends up living in a state of psychological uncertainty. They become emotionally controlled by things they cannot actually control. A delayed message creates panic. A cold tone creates overthinking. A social exclusion creates shame. A lack of praise creates self-doubt. A breakup creates identity collapse. Because when your self-worth depends on being chosen, every social interaction begins feeling emotionally dangerous. This is exhausting for the mind and body. The human nervous system was not designed to constantly seek external confirmation of existence, but many people live exactly this way. Their emotional state rises and falls based on whether they feel wanted. And because the feeling never lasts long, they remain trapped in endless emotional chasing. One compliment may calm insecurity briefly, but soon the mind needs another. One romantic connection may create temporary relief, but soon fear returns. One moment of validation may feel powerful, but it fades quickly. This creates a cycle where the person keeps searching outward while becoming increasingly disconnected inward. Buddhist teachings describe craving as a fire that cannot be satisfied through feeding alone. The more the mind depends on external pleasure or approval for peace, the more restless it becomes. Because external things are temporary, attention fades, relationships change, praise disappears, beauty changes, social status shifts. If your identity depends on unstable things, suffering becomes unavoidable. And nowhere is this more psychologically damaging than in the constant need to be chosen. Many people spend years trying to become more desirable, more impressive, more lovable, more useful, more attractive, more successful, more agreeable, believing that if they finally become enough, they will feel secure. But the goalpost keeps moving. Because the real issue was never the lack of approval. The real issue was the inability to feel valuable without it. This creates a painful emotional trap. No amount of validation ever feels permanent. No amount of praise fully quiets insecurity. No amount of attention completely removes fear. Because insecurity rooted in self-abandonment cannot be healed through external recognition alone. This is why some people feel emotionally starving even while receiving love. They may have friends, relationships, compliments, admiration, or social attention, yet still feel deeply empty inside. Their emotional hunger remains because they are not connected to themselves. They only feel temporarily stabilized when others reflect value back to them, and the moment the reflection disappears, anxiety returns. This creates emotional instability that slowly damages mental health. Some people become obsessed with being liked by everyone. They fear conflict intensely because disapproval feels emotionally unbearable. They become overly accommodating. They over-explain themselves constantly. They struggle to relax around others because they are always trying to maintain acceptance. Others become addicted to romantic validation. They constantly need to feel desired in order to feel alive. If someone loses interest in them, they experience emotional collapse. Not because the relationship alone mattered so deeply, but because their identity was attached to being wanted. Others seek validation through achievement. Their worth depends entirely on productivity, success, praise, or recognition. Rest feels guilty because without accomplishment, they no longer know how to feel valuable. Validation addiction wears many different faces, but underneath them all is the same painful fear. If nobody chooses me, do I still matter? This question silently controls millions of lives. It controls careers, relationships, social behavior, identity, appearance, emotional expression. People begin shaping themselves around what they believe will secure approval, and slowly, authenticity starts disappearing. This is one of the greatest psychological costs of constantly trying to be chosen: identity loss. A person who spends years adapting themselves for acceptance eventually forgets who they truly are. They become different versions of themselves around different people. They suppress opinions to avoid rejection. They silence emotions to maintain peace. They say yes when they want to say no. They become experts at social survival while becoming strangers to themselves internally. And this creates deep emotional confusion. Because when your identity becomes performance-based, you no longer know what is real inside you. Do you genuinely enjoy something, or are you trying to impress others? Do you truly love this person, or are you attached to being desired by them? Do you actually agree, or are you avoiding disapproval? Do you truly want this life, or does it simply make you feel validated? These questions become difficult to answer because the self has become buried underneath years of adaptation. The mind becomes fragmented. One part wants authenticity. Another part fears rejection. One part feels exhausted. Another part keeps performing. One part wants rest. Another part believes rest risks abandonment. This internal conflict drains enormous psychological energy. Many people who struggle with chronic anxiety are not only anxious about life itself, they are anxious about maintaining emotional acceptance. Their nervous system is constantly trying to predict, manage, and secure connection. And because human relationships are unpredictable, the anxiety never fully stops. This creates emotional hypervigilance. The person becomes highly sensitive to changes in energy, tone, behavior, and social dynamics. They notice everything. They overanalyze everything. They search for hidden meanings in simple interactions. They become emotionally exhausted because their mind never fully feels safe. Safety became attached to approval, and approval is unstable. This is why emotional exhaustion becomes inevitable. Trying to constantly be chosen is psychologically expensive. You monitor yourself all the time. You suppress parts of yourself. You manage other people's emotions. You avoid conflict. You overthink endlessly. You seek reassurance repeatedly. You fear disappointing people. You adapt constantly, and eventually the soul becomes tired. There are people who feel emotionally drained after simple conversations because they were never truly present. They were performing, trying to sound right, trying to seem likable, trying to avoid rejection, trying to maintain approval. This performance slowly disconnects people from natural joy, because true peace only exists where authenticity exists. The mind cannot fully relax while constantly pretending. This is why many people secretly feel lonely, even around others. Nobody truly knows them because they are always presenting edited versions of themselves. The connection may appear strong externally, but internally they feel unseen. And this loneliness becomes especially painful because now they fear that if people saw the real version of them, rejection would follow. So the performance continues. But performing for love eventually creates burnout. Burnout is not always caused by work alone. Emotional burnout happens when someone spends years abandoning their inner truth to maintain connection. The body begins carrying the weight. Sleep becomes restless. Anxiety increases. Motivation weakens. Emotional numbness appears. Joy disappears. Relationships begin feeling heavy instead of nourishing. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed from constant emotional management. And sadly, many people blame themselves for this exhaustion. They think they are too sensitive, too emotional, too needy, or too weak. But often, they are simply tired of living disconnected from themselves. The Buddha taught that suffering increases when the mind clings too tightly to external identity. Many people build their entire identity around being accepted, admired, useful, attractive, successful, or desired. But all external identities are unstable. The more tightly you cling to them, the more fragile your peace becomes. This is why criticism can feel devastating to someone dependent on validation. It does not simply challenge behavior, it threatens identity. A single rejection can activate enormous emotional pain because the mind interprets it as proof of worthlessness, and this pain often traces back much further than adulthood. Children who only received attention through performance often become adults terrified of failure. Children who felt emotionally invisible may become adults addicted to validation. Children who experienced conditional love often become adults constantly trying to earn acceptance. The nervous system carries these wounds quietly into adulthood, and without awareness, the person keeps recreating situations that reinforce the original fear. This is why some people unconsciously choose emotionally unavailable partners repeatedly. The inconsistency keeps them chasing approval. The uncertainty activates old attachment wounds. The relationship becomes emotionally consuming because being chosen by someone unavailable feels emotionally symbolic. If I can finally make this person love me, maybe I will finally feel enough. But this cycle never creates lasting peace. It only deepens emotional dependency. The more someone tries to prove their worth externally, the more disconnected they become internally. And this creates profound emptiness, because no human being can permanently survive psychologically while abandoning themselves continuously. At some point, the soul begins demanding honesty. The exhaustion becomes too heavy, the anxiety becomes unbearable, the overthinking becomes relentless. The loneliness becomes impossible to ignore, and slowly, awareness begins emerging. The person starts noticing how much of their life has been controlled by fear of rejection, how many decisions were made to gain approval, how many relationships were maintained through self-sacrifice, how many emotions were suppressed to remain accepted, how much energy was spent trying to become enough for everyone. This awareness can feel painful at first because it reveals how deeply fear shaped identity. But awareness is also liberation, because once you see the pattern clearly, you can begin stepping out of it consciously. Healing begins with understanding that your worth cannot remain dependent on constant external confirmation. Not because relationships are unimportant, not because connection is wrong, but because no relationship can create stable peace for someone disconnected from themselves. Inner stability must be developed internally. This does not happen overnight. At first, the nervous system may resist. The mind still wants reassurance. It still wants attention. It still wants proof. But slowly, through mindfulness and self-awareness, a person begins learning how to emotionally ground themselves without constantly depending on others. They begin noticing when they are overperforming. They notice when they are abandoning boundaries. They notice when anxiety is driving their behavior. They notice when they are seeking validation instead of genuine connection. And this awareness changes everything, because now, instead of automatically chasing approval, they pause, they breathe, they ask themselves deeper questions. Why do I need this person's validation so badly? What emotion am I trying to escape right now? What happens inside me when I feel ignored? Why does rejection feel like identity collapse? These questions begin reconnecting the person to themselves, and slowly the nervous system starts calming down, not because life becomes perfect, not because rejection disappears, but because identity is no longer entirely outsourced to other people's opinions. This creates enormous psychological freedom. A person who no longer depends entirely on external validation experiences relationships differently. They can still enjoy love deeply, but they do not emotionally collapse without constant reassurance. They can handle disagreement without feeling worthless. They can experience rejection without losing their sense of self completely. Their peace becomes more stable because it is rooted internally. This is the Buddhist movement away from attachment, not withdrawing from life, not rejecting relationships, but releasing the desperate clinging that turns connection into suffering. The more internally grounded someone becomes, the less exhausting life feels emotionally. They stop over-monitoring social situations. They stop performing constantly. They stop trying to control how everyone sees them. They stop needing universal approval. And something beautiful happens. Energy returns. Mental clarity returns. Authenticity returns. Peace returns. Because enormous psychological energy was once being consumed by fear. Fear of not being chosen, fear of not being enough, fear of not being wanted. And once those fears begin loosening, the mind finally has space to breathe again. This is where identity slowly rebuilds itself. Not through performance, not through approval, but through self-connection. You begin asking yourself what genuinely feels true, what genuinely nourishes your spirit, what relationships actually create peace, what environments support your authenticity, what boundaries protect your mental health. You stop building identity around external reactions and begin building it around inner honesty. This changes the entire quality of life, because now rejection may still hurt, but it no longer destroys you. Criticism may still sting, but it no longer defines you. Loneliness may still appear sometimes, but it no longer convinces you that you are worthless. The emotional world becomes steadier, quieter, less desperate. And perhaps the greatest psychological healing of all is this: you stop needing everyone to choose you in order to finally choose yourself. That is when the exhaustion begins lifting. That is when the anxiety starts loosening. That is when identity slowly returns. Because your nervous system no longer has to spend every moment fighting for proof that you deserve to exist. You finally begin understanding something your wounded heart struggled to believe for a very long time. Your value does not disappear when attention disappears. Your worth does not collapse when someone rejects you. And your identity was never meant to be built inside other people's approval. It was always meant to be discovered within your own awareness. And this is where many people finally begin understanding why rejection feels unbearable to them. It is not only because someone walked away. It is not only because love ended. The pain becomes overwhelming because rejection touches something much older and much deeper. It touches the empty space created by years of being disconnected from yourself. And when you have no strong relationship with your own inner world, another person's rejection can feel like the collapse of your entire identity. There is a kind of pain that enters the body when someone no longer chooses you. The chest tightens, the stomach sinks, the mind races endlessly searching for answers. Suddenly, everything feels unstable. You replay conversations, you analyze every detail. You wonder what you did wrong. You question your worth. You question your attractiveness. You question your personality. You question whether you were ever truly lovable at all. And for some people, this pain becomes almost unbearable because the relationship was never just a relationship. It had become emotional proof that they mattered. So when rejection happens, it does not simply feel like losing another person. It feels like losing themselves. This is why rejection hurts differently for different people. One person experiences sadness and eventually heals. Another person falls into emotional collapse, obsession, anxiety, depression, or deep self-hatred. The difference is often not the rejection itself. The difference is the relationship they had with themselves before the rejection happened. A person deeply connected to themselves may still feel heartbreak, grief, disappointment, and loneliness. But somewhere inside them, there remains a stable sense of identity. They know their value did not disappear because someone left. They can suffer without completely losing themselves. But someone disconnected from themselves experiences rejection very differently, because when you do not know your own worth internally, you borrow identity from external connection. The relationship becomes your emotional foundation. The other person becomes your mirror. Their love tells you who you are. Their attention stabilizes your insecurity. Their presence distracts you from your emptiness. And once they leave, everything inside you begins shaking. This is the hidden danger of building your self-worth through relationships. Another person becomes responsible for emotional stability they were never meant to carry. The relationship slowly becomes less about genuine connection and more about emotional survival. That is why rejection can feel physically painful. The nervous system interprets emotional abandonment almost like danger. Especially for people carrying old attachment wounds, rejection activates fear far beyond the present moment. It awakens childhood loneliness, emotional neglect, abandonment memories, and feelings of unworthiness that may have existed long before the relationship itself. This is why some people react to rejection with panic instead of sadness. Their nervous system is not only grieving the loss of someone, it is reliving the terror of not feeling emotionally safe. Buddhist teachings explain that suffering deepens when the mind attaches identity to impermanent things. Relationships are beautiful, but they are still impermanent. Human beings change, feelings change, circumstances change. When your entire sense of self becomes attached to another person's staying, rejection begins feeling like psychological destruction. The mind starts asking painful questions. If they left, what does that say about me? If they stopped loving me, was I ever enough? If they chose someone else, does that mean I am replaceable? And because the person already lacked deep inner connection, these questions quickly become self-punishment. This is why rejection often creates shame, not just sadness. Shame says, something is wrong with me. Sadness says, something painful happened. These are very different emotional experiences. A healthy relationship with yourself allows pain without turning pain into identity. But when someone is disconnected internally, rejection becomes proof of personal failure. They may stop eating properly, stop sleeping peacefully, lose motivation, obsess constantly, withdraw socially, lose confidence, question their entire identity, because they were never emotionally standing on their own foundation to begin with. This is why inner connection matters so deeply. Without it, every rejection feels catastrophic. Many people spend years trying to avoid rejection because they secretly believe they could not emotionally survive it. So they become hyper-attentive in relationships. They overgive, they over-explain, they tolerate poor treatment, they silence needs, they perform constantly, all to avoid abandonment. But ironically, this fear often creates the very suffering they hope to avoid. Because the more desperately someone fears rejection, the more they abandon themselves inside relationships, and self-abandonment creates anxiety, emotional instability, resentment, and exhaustion. The relationship becomes emotionally heavy because one person is no longer relating naturally. They are trying to emotionally survive. This survival energy changes everything. Love becomes fear-based. Attention becomes addictive, distance becomes terrifying, conflict becomes unbearable, and eventually the relationship stops feeling like peace. It begins feeling like emotional dependence. One of the saddest parts of inner disconnection is that many people do not even realize how little relationship they have with themselves until rejection forces them into solitude. Suddenly, without the relationship, they no longer know who they are. Their routines revolved around the other person. Their emotional energy revolved around the other person. Their thoughts revolved around the other person. Their happiness revolved around the other person. And now, in the silence left behind, they meet themselves for the first time in years. This meeting can feel terrifying, because many people have spent most of their lives escaping themselves through attachment. Some escape through romantic obsession, some through social validation, some through achievement, some through caretaking others, some through endless distraction. But underneath all these patterns often lives the same fear. If I am alone with myself, will I discover that I am not enough? This fear keeps people disconnected from their inner world, and the less connected they become internally, the more power rejection has over them externally. Buddhist wisdom teaches that inner suffering grows when we search outside ourselves for permanent security. Another person can offer love, comfort, and companionship, but they cannot permanently remove insecurity that lives inside someone disconnected from themselves. This is why some people continue feeling abandoned even inside relationships, because the wound was never only external. The wound lives inside the relationship they have with themselves. A person who does not trust themselves becomes terrified when someone leaves because now they are alone with a stranger, themselves. This is why healing rejection requires much more than simply moving on. Real healing requires rebuilding inner connection, not becoming emotionally numb, not pretending not to care, but learning how to remain connected to yourself, even while experiencing pain. This is extremely difficult at first, especially for people who built their identity through relationships. At first, rejection may feel like drowning. The mind keeps replaying memories, the body craves contact, the nervous system searches desperately for relief. You want answers, closure, validation, another chance, anything that might stop the emotional pain. But Buddhist practice teaches something profound during suffering. Stop running from the pain long enough to understand it. Most people immediately try escaping heartbreak through distraction, rebound relationships, social media, validation seeking, obsessive thinking, fantasy, constant contact. But avoidance only delays healing, because the rejection itself is not the deepest wound. The deeper wound is often the realization that you do not know how to emotionally hold yourself without someone else. This realization can feel heartbreaking, but it is also the beginning of transformation, because now the focus begins shifting inward. Instead of only asking, "Why did they leave?" you begin asking, "Why did losing them make me lose myself completely?" That question changes everything. You start noticing how much of your worth depended on their attention, how much of your emotional safety depended on their presence, how much of your identity depended on being loved by them. And while this awareness hurts, it also opens the door to freedom. Because now, healing is no longer just about getting over someone, it becomes about returning to yourself. This return happens slowly, very slowly sometimes. At first, the nervous system still panics. Loneliness still hurts. Memories still appear constantly. But gradually, if you stop abandoning yourself during heartbreak, something begins changing. You start listening to your own emotions instead of only chasing relief. You start noticing your own needs. You begin creating routines that support your healing. You begin reconnecting with parts of yourself that disappeared inside attachment. And little by little, the relationship with yourself strengthens. This is one of the most important parts of healing rejection. Not forcing yourself to stop caring immediately, but refusing to disappear while you care. Many people abandon themselves during heartbreak. They stop eating properly, stop sleeping, stop caring for their body, stop pursuing their goals, stop living fully. Their entire life freezes emotionally because one relationship ended. This is understandable pain, but prolonged self-abandonment deepens suffering. The Buddhist path encourages compassionate awareness instead. You acknowledge pain without making pain your identity. You grieve honestly without collapsing completely into despair. You allow heartbreak without deciding it proves your worthlessness. This balance is difficult but life-changing because rejection is painful, but rejection is not proof that you are unlovable. Sometimes people leave because they are emotionally unavailable. Sometimes they leave because they are confused themselves. Sometimes they leave because they are chasing different paths. Sometimes they leave because they lack emotional maturity. Sometimes relationships simply do not align. But wounded minds personalize everything. If they left, I must not be enough. This belief creates enormous suffering, and it often comes from childhood emotional conditioning. Children naturally personalize emotional disconnection. If caregivers were distant, critical, neglectful, inconsistent, or unavailable, the child often concludes, "Something about me must be wrong." Later in life, romantic rejection reactivates this exact wound. The adult feels the same emotional terror the child once felt. This is why rejection can feel so overwhelming emotionally. The nervous system is not only responding to present loss, it is responding to old emotional pain layered underneath it. Understanding this changes how you relate to heartbreak. You stop seeing yourself as weak for feeling deeply. You begin recognizing that old wounds are surfacing. And instead of punishing yourself, you begin meeting yourself with compassion. Compassion is essential during rejection because wounded minds become cruel very quickly. They compare, blame, criticize, obsess, humiliate themselves internally. But self-hatred does not heal abandonment wounds. It deepens them. This is why building a relationship with yourself becomes the foundation of emotional resilience. A healthy relationship with yourself means learning how to comfort yourself internally instead of depending entirely on others to regulate your emotions. It means validating your own feelings, respecting your own boundaries, honoring your own needs, listening to your intuition, spending time with yourself without panic, developing trust in your own presence. The stronger this relationship becomes, the less devastating rejection feels. Not because rejection stops hurting completely, but because your identity no longer collapses around it. You begin understanding that another person leaving does not erase your humanity. You still exist. Your worth still exists. Your future still exists. Your spirit still exists. This realization creates enormous emotional freedom, because now relationships stop becoming your only source of meaning. You still value love deeply, but you no longer treat love as proof that you deserve to exist. This changes how you experience connection entirely. You stop begging for validation. You stop chasing unavailable people endlessly. You stop accepting emotional crumbs. You stop staying where your peace continuously disappears. Because now you know how to remain emotionally connected to yourself even when another person walks away. This inner relationship becomes your foundation. And once that foundation strengthens, rejection loses some of its power to destroy you. You may still cry, still grieve, still miss someone deeply, but somewhere inside you remain stable. You no longer disappear completely. This stability changes heartbreak from emotional annihilation into emotional transformation. Because now, pain becomes a teacher instead of only a punishment. You begin learning where you abandoned yourself, where you ignored intuition, where you depended too heavily on external validation, where you disconnected from your own needs, where fear controlled your choices, and instead of becoming bitter, you become more conscious, more honest, more grounded, more connected to yourself. This is one of the deepest Buddhist truths about suffering. Pain can either deepen unconsciousness or awaken awareness. Rejection can either make you hate yourself more or finally return to yourself completely. And perhaps this is why inner connection matters so deeply. Because when you truly build a relationship with yourself, another person's rejection stops defining your identity. You understand that someone leaving may create grief, but it does not erase your value. You understand that loneliness is survivable. You understand that your worth existed before the relationship and continues after it ends. And slowly, the fear of abandonment weakens, not because everyone suddenly stays forever, but because you finally stop abandoning yourself when others leave. That changes everything. Because the deepest healing is not finding someone who never rejects you. The deepest healing is becoming someone who remains connected to themselves even during rejection. Someone who can experience heartbreak without losing their soul. Someone who can feel pain without deciding they are worthless. Someone who no longer needs another person to constantly confirm their existence. This is inner stability. This is emotional maturity. This is the Buddhist path back to yourself. And once you begin walking this path, rejection no longer feels like the end of your identity. It simply becomes one painful moment inside a life that still belongs completely to you. And this is where the path becomes deeper, because once rejection no longer feels like the end of your identity, you begin to understand one of the most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism. Non-attachment is not about becoming cold. It is not about pretending you do not care. It is not about loving people halfway so they cannot hurt you. It is about learning how to love without turning another person into the foundation of your peace. There is a quiet suffering that begins when you want love, but you also want to control how love behaves. You want the person to stay. You want them to understand you. You want them to choose you in the exact way your wounded heart needs. You want the relationship to become what you imagined. You want the message, the apology, the commitment, the reassurance, the return. And slowly your heart stops resting in love and starts gripping an outcome. This is where attachment begins to hurt. Not because love is wrong, but because the mind becomes frightened of losing what it has claimed as necessary for survival. Love becomes mixed with fear. Care becomes mixed with control. Desire becomes mixed with anxiety. Instead of saying, "I enjoy this connection," the heart begins saying, "I cannot be okay unless this connection becomes what I need it to be." That is the beginning of emotional dependency. Buddhist wisdom teaches that. Suffering grows when the mind clings to what is changing by nature, and human relationships are always changing. People grow, people struggle, people misunderstand, people heal at different speeds, people leave, people return, people feel deeply one season and differently in another. This does not make love meaningless. It makes love human. But when the mind refuses this truth, it suffers. You may love someone, but you cannot control their emotional maturity. You may care deeply, but you cannot force them to meet you with honesty. You may show kindness, but you cannot make them value it. You may give your best, but you cannot guarantee that they will stay. And when your peace depends on controlling these outcomes, you become trapped. Non-attachment begins when you stop confusing love with possession. Many people say, "I love them," but beneath the love there is fear. Fear of losing them, fear of being replaced, fear of not being chosen, fear that their distance means you are worthless. So the love becomes tight, it becomes anxious, it becomes heavy. It starts asking for constant proof. It starts needing certainty from something that can never be fully certain. And once love becomes fear, the relationship loses softness. You start watching instead of trusting. You start analyzing instead of living. You start controlling instead of connecting. You start measuring every response, every tone, every delay, every change in energy. The person becomes less of a human being and more of an emotional weather system you keep checking to know if you are safe. This is not peace. This is attachment. Non-attachment does not mean you stop feeling. It means you stop making your feelings the master of your behavior. You may feel longing, but you do not have to chase. You may feel fear, but you do not have to abandon yourself. You may feel desire, but you do not have to turn desire into desperation. You may feel grief, but you do not have to decide grief means you are broken. This is emotional freedom. The attached mind says, "They must choose me or I am nothing." The awakened mind says, "I would love to be chosen, but I will not lose myself if I am not." The attached mind says, "This relationship must become what I want." The awakened mind says, "I will meet reality as it is, not only as I wish it to be." The attached mind says, "If they leave, I cannot survive." The awakened mind says, "If they leave, I will grieve, but I will remain with myself." That difference changes the entire experience of love. Most people do not suffer only because someone leaves. They suffer because they built an entire emotional story around the person staying. They created a future in their mind. They imagined healing through that relationship. They attached their identity to being wanted by that person. So when reality changes, they do not only lose the person, they lose the dream, the fantasy, the imagined version of themselves that existed inside that outcome. This is why attachment to outcomes creates such deep pain. You are not only grieving what happened, you are grieving what you hoped would happen. And sometimes the imagined future hurts more to lose than the actual relationship. You may have been attached to the idea that this person would finally make you feel chosen, finally prove you were lovable, finally heal the wound left by everyone who failed to see you before. But that is too much power to place in another human being's hands. No person should become the final judge of your worth. No relationship should become the only doorway to your peace. No outcome should decide whether you belong to yourself. Buddhist non-attachment invites you to release this burden. It asks you to love with open hands, to care deeply but not cling tightly, to show up honestly but not force what refuses to grow. To offer love but not use love as a contract demanding that reality obey your fear. This is difficult because many people were taught that love means holding on no matter what. But sometimes holding on is not devotion. Sometimes it is fear refusing to bow to truth. There is a difference between commitment and clinging. Commitment is conscious. Clinging is desperate. Commitment respects both people's humanity. Clinging tries to control someone so you do not have to feel loss. Commitment creates steadiness. Clinging creates pressure, and pressure slowly suffocates love. When you are attached to an outcome, you stop seeing the person clearly. You see what you need them to become. You see your hope, your fear, your fantasy, your unmet childhood longing. You may ignore who they actually are because accepting reality would threaten the outcome you want. This is why attachment creates emotional confusion. You see inconsistency but call it potential. You feel anxiety but call it passion. You notice distance but call it complexity. You experience pain but call it love. The mind under attachment edits reality to protect desire. But Buddhist awareness does the opposite. It gently returns you to what is true. Not to punish you, but to free you. It asks, what is actually happening here? Not, what do you wish was happening? Not, what are you afraid to admit? Not, what story are you telling yourself so you can keep holding on? Just this simple, powerful question, what is real? This question can break illusions. And yes, truth can hurt. But illusion hurts longer. When you practice non-attachment, you begin seeing that love is not proven by how much suffering you can endure. Love is not measured by how long you can wait for someone to become kind, present, honest, or ready. Love is not made holy by self-abandonment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop forcing a connection that is teaching you to betray your own soul. Non-attachment teaches you to release the need to make people different from who they are showing themselves to be. This does not mean giving up too quickly. It does not mean every difficulty means you should leave. Relationships require patience, communication, forgiveness, and growth. But non-attachment helps you see the difference between growth and repeated suffering, between a person trying and a person merely apologizing, between temporary struggle and chronic emotional starvation. When you are attached, you cling to words. When you are aware, you observe patterns. Words can comfort attachment, but patterns reveal truth. A person can say they care, but their behavior shows whether care has roots. A person can say they will change, but consistency shows whether change is real. A person can say you matter, but your nervous system often knows whether you are emotionally safe. Non-attachment gives you the courage to believe what life is showing you. This courage is not harsh, it is compassionate. Because every time you deny reality, you extend your suffering. Every time you cling to what is not choosing you, you delay your return to yourself. Every time you force an outcome, you trade peace for control. And control is exhausting. Many people do not realize how much energy they spend trying to control emotional outcomes. They plan what to say so someone will respond warmly. They adjust their personality so someone will stay interested. They hide pain so the connection does not become uncomfortable. They overthink every move, hoping to secure love. But love that must be secured through constant self-monitoring is not peace. It is emotional labor. Non-attachment allows you to stop auditioning for your place in someone's life. You show up honestly, you communicate truthfully, you love sincerely, and then you allow reality to reveal whether the connection is capable of meeting you. This is not passivity, it is wisdom. Passivity says, I will accept anything. Wisdom says, I will stop forcing what does not bring peace. Passivity abandons boundaries. Wisdom honors them. Passivity stays because it fears loss. Wisdom stays only where love and respect can breathe. This is why non-attachment is not weakness. It is one of the strongest forms of self-respect. It takes strength to love without controlling. It takes strength to care without begging. It takes strength to desire without becoming desperate. It takes strength to let someone be who they are, even when who they are cannot meet your heart. And it takes deep strength to walk away from an outcome your wounded self desperately wanted. Many people resist non-attachment because they think it means loving less. But in truth, attachment often prevents real love. When you are attached, you are not always loving the person. You may be loving what they give you, what they represent, how they soothe you, how they make you feel chosen. Your love becomes mixed with need. Non-attachment purifies love. It allows you to care for someone without turning them into your emotional possession. It allows you to want closeness without making another person responsible for your entire inner world. It allows you to respect someone's freedom while honoring your own peace. This kind of love is mature. It does not grip. It does not chase. It does not beg. It does not punish. It does not collapse. It remains open, but rooted. It says, I can love you deeply, but I will not abandon myself to keep you. That sentence is the heart of Buddhist self-worth. Because attachment often asks you to abandon yourself for an outcome. It asks you to wait beyond your capacity. It asks you to shrink your truth. It asks you to tolerate confusion. It asks you to silence your needs. It asks you to make another person's presence more important than your own peace. Non-attachment asks something different. It asks you to stay awake, to notice craving, to notice fear, to notice the urge to control, to notice the stories your mind creates, to notice when love becomes dependency, and instead of judging yourself, you simply observe. Observation creates space. In that space, you find choice. Without awareness, you react automatically. You chase, you beg, you over-explain, you cling, you panic, you abandon yourself. But with awareness, you can pause and ask, what would self-respect do here? That pause is sacred. It is the place where old patterns begin losing power. A person practicing non-attachment still feels pain, but they no longer obey every fear. They may miss someone, but they do not return to what destroys them. They may desire reassurance, but they learn to soothe themselves. They may hope for love, but they do not build their identity around the outcome. This is how emotional dependency begins to weaken, not through force, not through pretending, but through repeated moments of choosing awareness over craving. You choose not to send the desperate message. You choose not to explain your worth again. You choose not to chase someone's inconsistency. You choose not to turn silence into self-hatred. You choose not to make rejection mean you are nothing. Small choices become inner freedom, and slowly your nervous system begins learning something new. Love can exist without panic. Desire can exist without desperation. Connection can exist without control. Loss can hurt without destroying you. This is the training of the heart. At first, non-attachment may feel like loss because you are used to confusing intensity with love. The absence of emotional chaos may feel empty. The lack of chasing may feel strange. Peace may feel unfamiliar. But over time, you begin realizing that calm is not emptiness. Calm is what your spirit needed all along. The more you practice non-attachment, the more you stop needing relationships to follow your fear's script. You stop demanding that one person become your proof, your savior, your home, your healing, your identity. You allow people to be human, and you allow yourself to be whole. This does not make love smaller. It makes love cleaner. You can enjoy someone without clinging to them. You can appreciate affection without becoming dependent on it. You can build intimacy without losing your center. You can commit without turning commitment into possession. And if someone leaves, you can grieve without deciding your life is over. This is the inner freedom Buddhism points toward. Not a life without love, but a life where love no longer becomes bondage. Not a heart without desire, but a heart no longer ruled by craving. Not a relationship without emotion, but a relationship without self-abandonment. When you stop attaching your worth to outcomes, relationships become more honest. You no longer force people to play roles they cannot carry. You no longer use love to escape yourself. You no longer confuse control with security. You begin seeing people clearly, and you allow yourself to be seen clearly too. This creates healthier connection, because now love is not built on fear. It is built on presence. You are not asking, "Will you complete me?" You are asking, "Can we meet each other truthfully?" You are not saying, "I need you to stay so I can feel worthy." You are saying, "I value this connection, but I also belong to myself." You are not clinging to a future that may never arrive. You are living with awareness in the present, and perhaps that is the deepest teaching of all. Attachment lives in fear of the future. It worries about losing, being abandoned, being replaced, being forgotten. Non-attachment returns you to this moment. It asks, what is true now? What is peaceful now? What is loving now? What is honest now? The present moment reveals what attachment tries to hide. And in the present moment, you can feel whether you are connected or clinging, whether you are loving or fearing, whether you are choosing or begging, whether you are peaceful or abandoning yourself. This kind of awareness slowly restores dignity, because dignity is what returns when you stop forcing yourself into places where your soul cannot breathe. You no longer chase outcomes that require self-betrayal. You no longer beg for futures that cost your peace. You no longer turn love into a battlefield where you must constantly prove you deserve to be chosen. Instead, you begin living from a deeper truth. What is meant for you will not require the destruction of yourself. What is healthy for you will not demand constant panic. What is real will not need endless performance to survive. And what leaves was never the source of your worth. This is not easy wisdom. It is not soft comfort. It is a discipline, a practice, a daily returning. You will still feel attachment. You will still want outcomes. You will still feel fear when love feels uncertain. But now you can meet those feelings with awareness instead of letting them rule your life. You can place one hand on the heart and say, I want this, but I do not need to lose myself for it. That is non-attachment. You can say, I love this person, but I cannot control their path. That is non-attachment. You can say, I am grieving, but I am still whole. That is non-attachment. You can say, I hope they choose me, but I choose myself either way. That is liberation, and once this teaching begins living inside you, relationships stop feeling like emotional survival. They become spaces for truth, kindness, growth, and shared presence. You are no longer trying to trap love. You are learning how to let love breathe. Because love held too tightly becomes fear. Love held with awareness becomes freedom. And when you understand this, you stop asking every relationship to save you from yourself. You stop turning every outcome into a verdict on your worth. You stop making another person's choice the center of your spiritual life. You return to yourself, again and again, not because you love others less, but because you finally understand that real love can only grow where self-abandonment ends. And maybe that is the truth your soul has been trying to remember this entire time. You were never meant to spend your life begging for love that required you to abandon yourself. You were never meant to shrink your needs, silence your intuition, chase validation, fear solitude, or lose your identity just to feel worthy of being chosen. Throughout these lessons, you saw how attachment creates suffering, how emotional wounds turn love into survival, and how the desperate need for approval slowly disconnects people from their own spirit. But you also discovered something deeper. Healing does not begin when everyone finally sees your worth. Healing begins the moment you stop measuring your worth through other people's eyes. The more you return to yourself, the less power rejection has over you. The more you learn inner peace, the less desperate you become for external validation. And the more connected you become to your own soul, the more love stops feeling like fear and starts feeling like freedom. So tonight, before you sleep, sit with this question honestly. At what moment in your life did you first start believing you had to earn love by abandoning yourself? If this message spoke to something deep inside you, leave your answer in the comments. Someone reading your words may realize they are not alone in their pain for the very first time. And if you are ready to continue learning how to heal attachment, rebuild self-worth, and find peace within yourself, subscribe to the channel and continue this journey with us. Until next time, breathe deeply, return to yourself gently, and remember this: being chosen by others means very little if you keep abandoning your own soul.